Chapter 1. The old sea dog at the Admiral Benbow Squire Trelawney, Dr. Livesey, and the other men asked me to write the story of Treasure Island from start to finish. I will tell everything except the exact location of the island, because the treasure is still there. So I am writing this in the year 17, remembering the time when my father ran the Admiral Benbow Inn. That was when the old seaman, with a scar on his face, came to stay with us. I remember him clearly. He came to the inn with a big sea chest. He was tall and strong, with dark skin and a messy pigtail hanging from his shoulder. His hands were rough and scarred, and he had a big scar on his face. He looked around, whistling, and then he started singing an old sea song. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo ho ho, and a bottle of rum. He knocked on the door with a stick and asked for a glass of rum. When he got it, he drank slowly, enjoying the taste and looking around at the cliffs and the sign of the inn. "This is a nice place," he said. "Do you have many visitors?" My father said no, there weren't many customers. "Well, this place is perfect for me," he said. "I want to stay here. I'm a simple man. I want rum, bacon, and eggs. I'll stay here and watch for ships. Call me captain." He threw a few gold coins on the floor. "You can tell me when I've worked through that," he said, looking very serious. Even though his clothes were dirty and he spoke roughly, he didn't look like a common sailor. He looked like a man used to giving orders. The man who brought his chest told us the captain had arrived the day before at the Royal George Inn. He had asked about inns along the coast and decided to stay at ours because it was quiet. That was all we knew about him. The captain was quiet most of the time. He would walk around the cove or the cliffs with a telescope. In the evenings, he would sit by the fire and drink strong rum. He didn't talk much, but sometimes he would blow through his nose like a foghorn when people spoke to him. We learned not to bother him. Every day he would ask if any sailors had come by. At first, we thought he was lonely, but soon we realized he was trying to avoid sailors. When one came to the inn, the captain would peep through the door before entering the room. He was always quiet when they were there. One day, the captain asked me to watch out for a sailor with one leg. He promised to give me a silver coin every month if I told him when I saw the man. Every month I would ask for the coin, and sometimes he would act angry. But by the end of the week, he would give it to me and remind me to watch for the sailor with one leg. I dreamed about this sailor all the time. On windy nights, I would see him in many scary forms. Sometimes he had no leg at all, sometimes just one leg in the middle of his body. I would dream of him chasing me, and I was terrified. But I wasn't as afraid of the captain. He drank a lot of rum some nights and sang old sea songs loudly. He would force everyone to listen to him or join in. Sometimes the house would shake with his song, and everyone sang along because they were too scared not to. When he was like that, he would slap the table and tell everyone to be quiet. He didn't let anyone leave until he had drunk enough and went to bed. His stories were very frightening. He told terrible tales about pirates, storms at sea, and places like the Dry Tortugas. He said he had sailed with the worst pirates and criminals. His words shocked our quiet neighbors, but they kept coming back. Some of the younger men even admired him, calling him a true sea dog, and saying he was the kind of man who made England strong on the sea. But the captain stayed too long. Month after month he didn't pay, and my father didn't ask for more. When he tried, the captain would roar and stare until my father left the room. I saw my father get upset, and I think it made him even sicker. The captain never changed his clothes except to buy stockings from a traveler. His hat was falling apart, and he let it hang. He patched his coat himself until it was mostly patches. He never wrote letters and didn't speak to anyone except when he was drunk. No one ever saw him open his big sea chest. The captain was only angry once. My father was very sick by then, and Dr. Livesey came to visit him. He sat and talked with my mother, and I remember how different he looked from the captain. The doctor was clean and neat, with white hair and bright eyes. The captain, however, was dirty and drunk, with his arms on the table. Suddenly, the captain started singing his song, 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. At first I thought the dead man's chest was the captain's sea chest, and it scared me even more. The doctor didn't like the song, and he looked at the captain angrily. The captain got louder and louder, but the doctor didn't stop talking. Finally the captain shouted, "Silence there!" The doctor said, "Are you talking to me, sir?" The captain nodded, and the doctor replied, "If you keep drinking rum, you will soon be a very dirty man." The captain got very angry and stood up, pulling out a knife. But the doctor wasn't scared. He said, "Put the knife away now, or you will be hanged." The captain stared at him for a while, but then he put the knife away and sat down, grumbling like a defeated dog. The doctor said, "Now, I know you're here, and I'll be watching you. I'm not just a doctor, I'm also a magistrate. If you cause any trouble, I'll make sure you're caught." Soon after, the doctor left. The captain stayed quiet for the rest of the evening and many nights after that. Chapter: Black Dog Appears and Disappears. Not long after this, strange things started happening, and it was then that we finally got rid of the captain. It was a very cold winter with heavy snow and strong winds, and it was clear my father wouldn't last much longer. He got worse every day, and my mother and I had to take care of the inn by ourselves. We were very busy and didn't have time to think too much about the captain. One cold morning in January, very early, the cove was covered in frost, and the sun had just started shining on the hilltops. The captain had gotten up early and was walking along the beach with his sword hanging from his coat and a telescope under his arm. I remember seeing his breath in the cold air as he walked, and then I heard him snort loudly, as if he was still angry with Dr. Livesey. While my mother was upstairs with my father, I was setting the table for breakfast when the door opened, and a man I didn't recognize came in. He was pale and seemed weak, and he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Even though he had a sword, he didn't look like a fighter. I had always kept an eye out for sailors, and this man was strange. He didn't look like a sailor, but there was something about him that seemed related to the sea. I asked what he wanted, and he said he wanted some rum. As I was about to leave the room to get it, he sat down on a table and asked me to come closer. I stayed where I was, holding my napkin. "Come here, son," he said. "Come closer." I stepped forward. "Is this table for my mate Bill?" he asked with a sneaky smile. I told him I didn't know anyone named Bill, and that the table was for the captain who stayed with us. "Well," he said, "maybe Bill would be called the captain. He has a scar on one cheek, and he's very friendly when he drinks. If your captain has a scar on his cheek, maybe it's him. Is my mate Bill in this house?" I told him the captain was out for a walk. "Which way did he go?" the man asked. I pointed towards the rock and told him the captain would probably return soon. The stranger looked pleased. "This will be just as good as a drink for my mate Bill," he said, and I didn't like the look on his face. I thought the man might be wrong, but I didn't know what to do. He kept hanging around by the door, looking around like a cat waiting for a mouse. Once I went outside, but he called me back, and when I didn't hurry enough, his face changed and he ordered me inside. I quickly obeyed, and when I came back, he was acting kind again, patting me on the shoulder. "I have a son of my own," he said. "He's just like you, and he's my pride. But boys need discipline. If you had sailed with Bill, you wouldn't have stood there for long when he spoke to you. Now Bill is coming, and we'll surprise him." The man then backed into the parlor with me, hiding behind the open door. I felt very scared, and I could see that he was nervous too. He took his sword out of its sheath and kept swallowing, like he had a lump in his throat. Finally, the captain came in, slammed the door, and went straight to his breakfast. The stranger spoke to him. "Bill," he said. The captain turned around and his face went pale. He looked like he had seen a ghost. "Black Dog," he gasped. "And who else?" said the man. "Black Dog, come to visit my old friend Bill at the Admiral Benbow." "Ah, Bill, we've had some wild times together." The captain looked very scared. He asked, "What do you want?" Black Dog said, "I'll have a glass of rum from this boy, and then we can sit down and talk like old friends." When I brought the rum, the two of them were sitting at the table, with Black Dog next to the door, looking at both the captain and the way out. He told me to leave the door open, and I went to the bar. For a long time, I couldn't hear anything. But then their voices got louder. I could hear the captain shouting, "No, no, enough!" Then there was a loud noise, a clash of swords and a cry of pain. I looked up and saw Black Dog running out the door with the captain chasing him, both with swords in their hands. Black Dog was bleeding from his shoulder. The captain swung his sword at Black Dog, but the blow hit the sign for the Admiral Benbow instead. You can still see the mark on the sign. Black Dog ran away quickly, and the captain stood staring at the sign for a moment, looking confused. Then he turned and went back into the house. "Jim," he said, "rum." He was staggering and grabbed the wall to stay upright. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "Rum," he said again. "I need rum. Get me some rum." I ran to get it, but I was so shaken by everything that had happened that I spilled some. As I was still trying to manage, I heard a loud crash in the parlor. I ran in and found the captain lying on the floor. My mother heard the noise and came running downstairs to help. We tried to lift his head, but he was breathing heavily, and his face looked awful. "Oh dear," my mother said. "What a disgrace. And your father is sick." We didn't know what to do for the captain. I tried to give him some rum, but his mouth was tightly shut. Just then, Dr. Livesey came in to visit my father. "Oh, doctor," we said, "what shall we do? Where is he hurt?" "Hurt," the doctor said. "He's not hurt. He had a stroke, like I warned him. Now, Mrs. Hawkins, go upstairs and don't tell your husband about this. Jim, get me a bowl." I went to get a bowl, and when I returned, the doctor had already taken the captain's coat off and was looking at his arm. The captain's arm was covered with tattoos, including one of a man hanging from a gallows. "This is interesting," the doctor said, pointing to the tattoo of the gallows. "It's a warning. Now, let's see what kind of blood you have, Mr. Bones." The doctor opened a vein, and the captain started to wake up. He looked around, saw the doctor, and frowned. Then he looked at me and seemed relieved. "Where's Black Dog?" he asked. "There's no Black Dog here," the doctor said. "You've been drinking rum, and that gave you a stroke. I just saved you from dying. Now, Mr. Bones—" "That's not my name," the captain interrupted. "It's the name of a pirate I know," said the doctor. "And if you keep drinking rum, you'll die. Do you understand? If you drink again, you'll die." We helped the captain to his bed, where he fell back, looking weak. The doctor told us, "He needs to rest for a week. Another stroke, and it will be over for him." Chapter 3. The Black Spot. Around noon, I went to the captain's room with some drinks and medicine. He was lying in the same position as before, but he seemed weaker and more excited. "Jim," he said, "you're the only one who's helpful. I've always been good to you. Every month I've given you a silver 4-penny. Now I'm in a bad way, and I've been left alone. Jim, please bring me a glass of rum." "The doctor—" I began, but he cut me off, cursing the doctor. "Doctors know nothing about sailors," he said. "I've been in places with sickness and people dying around me. I lived on rum. Rum has always been everything to me. If I can't have it, my blood will be on you, Jim." He continued for a while, and I could see he was becoming more upset. "Look, Jim, my hands are shaking," he said. "I haven't had any rum today. If I don't get a drink, I'll get the horrors. I've already seen old Flint in the corner, as clear as day." I was worried because my father was very sick, but I remembered the doctor's words, and I didn't want to accept his money. "I don't want your money," I said. "I'll get you a glass, but nothing more." When I gave him the rum, he grabbed it and drank it quickly. "That's better," he said. "Now, how long do I have to lie here?" "A week," I said. "A week!" he shouted. "That's too long. They'll come after me. I've been saving my money, but now they want to take what's mine. But I'll trick them again. I'm not scared of them." He tried to get out of bed but struggled. He grabbed my shoulder for support, and his legs felt weak. Despite his words, his voice sounded very weak. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. "That doctor's made me worse," he muttered. "My ears are ringing. Lay me back down." I helped him back to his bed, and he lay there quietly for a while. "Jim," he said, "you saw that man today?" "Black Dog?" I asked. "Ah, Black Dog," he said. "He's bad, but there's worse behind him. If I don't get away and they give me the black spot, they want my sea chest. You need to go to the doctor and tell him to get everyone, magistrates too, and have them come to the Admiral Benbow. I know the place where we hid the treasure, but don't tell anyone unless you see Black Dog again, or a sailor with one leg." "What is the black spot, Captain?" I asked. "It's a summons, a warning," he said. "I'll tell you when they give it to me, but you need to watch out, Jim. If you help me, I'll share the treasure with you." He kept talking, but his voice was weaker. After I gave him some medicine, which he drank slowly, he fell into a deep sleep, and I left him. I would have told the doctor everything, but my father suddenly died that evening. We were so sad and busy with funeral plans that I didn't think about the captain. The next day, the captain got downstairs and had his meals as usual, though he didn't eat much. He drank more rum than usual, taking it from the bar. The night before the funeral, he was very drunk and sang loudly, which was shocking in the house where we were mourning. The doctor was far away and didn't come back to the inn after my father's death. The captain's health didn't improve. In fact, he seemed to get weaker. He climbed up and down stairs, sometimes putting his nose out the door to smell the sea. He still didn't talk to me much, and I think he had forgotten what he had told me. One afternoon, just after the funeral. I was standing outside thinking about my father when I saw someone coming along the road. The man was blind and wore a big green shade over his eyes. He was hunched over and wore a big old sea coat. He looked terrible. He stopped near the inn and called out, "Can anyone help a poor blind man who has lost his sight in the service of his country, England? God bless King George. Can someone tell me where I am?" "You're at the Admiral Benbow, Black Hill Cove," I said. "I hear a voice," he said. "Will you help me in?" I reached out my hand, and the blind man grabbed it tightly like a vice. I was scared, but he pulled me towards him. "Now, boy," he said, "take me to the captain." "I can't," I said. "The captain isn't well. He sits with a drawn sword. Another man—" "Take me in now, or I'll break your arm," he said, and he twisted my arm so hard it hurt. "I can't," I said. "The captain is not well." "Take me now," he shouted, and his voice was so cold and cruel that I couldn't refuse. I walked with him into the inn and to the parlor where the captain was sitting, drunk. The blind man kept a tight grip on me. "Take me straight to him," he ordered. "When I see him, say, 'Here's a friend for you, Bill.'" I was so scared that I forgot about the captain and followed the blind man's orders. When we reached the parlor, I said the words in a shaking voice. The captain looked up, and the rum seemed to leave him. He looked pale, like he was very sick. He tried to stand, but I don't think he had the strength. "Now, Bill, sit still," the blind man said. "Business is business. Give me your left hand." We did what he asked. The blind man took something from his stick and gave it to the captain, who grabbed it quickly. "That's done," the blind man said, and then he left the room quickly. I could hear his stick tapping on the road as he walked away. It took a moment for the captain and I to gather ourselves. Then the captain looked at the thing in his hand and said, 10 o'clock, 6 hours. We'll do it." He stood up suddenly but fell to the floor. I ran to him, but it was too late. The captain had died from a stroke. I was shocked. Even though I hadn't liked the captain, I started crying. It was the second death I had experienced, and the sadness from losing my father was still in my heart. Chapter 4. The Sea Chest. I quickly told my mother everything I knew, and we realized that we were in a dangerous situation. Some of the captain's money might be ours, but I didn't think his old shipmates, like Black Dog and the blind man, would be willing to pay the captain's debts. The captain had asked me to go to Dr. Livesey, but that would leave my mother alone and in danger, so we couldn't do that. We knew we couldn't stay in the house any longer, because every little noise scared us. The house seemed haunted, and we were both frightened by the captain's dead body and the idea of the blind man coming back. We needed to make a plan fast. We decided to go to the nearby village for help. The village was not far, just on the other side of a cove, and it was in the opposite direction from where the blind man had come. We were only a few minutes on the road when we arrived. It was already getting dark, and I felt better when I saw the lights in the windows of the houses. But, to our surprise, no one would help us. When we told them about our troubles, everyone was too scared. They had all heard of the captain, whose name was well known, and they were terrified of anyone who had been with him. Some people had seen strangers on the road and thought they were smugglers. Others had even seen a small boat near the cove. No one wanted to help defend the inn. Everyone was afraid, but my mother, being brave, spoke up. She said we wouldn't lose money that was owed to us. "If none of you will go," she said, Jim and I will go back. We will open the chest, even if it kills us. And I'll take Mrs. Crossley's bag to carry the money back." I said I would go with her, even though the others warned us that it was too dangerous. The best they would do was give me a pistol for protection and promise to have horses ready if we needed to escape. One of the men was going to ride to Dr. Livesey's house for help. My heart was racing as we set out in the cold night. The moon was coming up through the fog, which made us hurry. If we were out too long, anyone watching could see us, so we moved quietly. We didn't hear anything strange, and we quickly reached the inn. I locked the door behind us, and we stood in the dark, alone with the captain's body. My mother lit a candle, and we walked into the parlor. The captain was still lying as we had left him, his eyes open and one arm stretched out. "Draw the blind, Jim," my mother whispered. "They might be watching outside." Once I did that, she sighed and said, "We have to get the key from him, but who will touch him?" I knelt down and searched his pockets. I found only a few coins, a thimble, some needles, tobacco, a knife, a compass, and other small items. I was starting to lose hope when my mother suggested checking around his neck. I didn't want to, but I opened his shirt and found a key tied to a string. We were both relieved. We hurried upstairs to the captain's room where his chest was. It looked like any other sailor's chest, with a letter B burned on the top and some damage from rough use. My mother took the key, and after struggling with the stiff lock, she opened the chest. The smell of tobacco and tar came out. The top of the chest was filled with clothes that had never been worn. Under that were some tools, a compass, a watch, and some other items. We hadn't found much of value until we saw a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and a bag that jingled with gold coins. "I'll make sure I get what's mine," my mother said. She started counting the coins, putting them into Mrs. Crossley's bag. It was slow work because the coins were from many countries, all mixed together. As we were counting, I heard the tapping of the blind man's stick. He was getting closer, and we quickly froze in place. The tapping came to the door, and we could hear him trying to open it. After a moment he walked away, and we were both very relieved. "Mother," I said, "let's take what we have and leave." I was sure the blind man would have brought more people, and I didn't want to be caught. My mother agreed, and we quickly left the room and the inn. The moon was clearer now, and we had to hurry. We had only gone a little way when we heard footsteps behind us and saw a light moving closer. My mother suddenly stopped and said, "Take the money and run. I'm going to faint." I was afraid, and I helped her down to the little bridge near the inn. She collapsed on my shoulder, and I had to drag her under the bridge to hide. We stayed there, close to the inn, hoping no one would find us. Chapter 5. The Last of the Blind Man. My curiosity was stronger than my fear, so I quietly moved to the bank again, hiding behind a bush so I could see the road in front of the house. I didn't have to wait long before I saw the men arrive, about 7 or 8 of them, running quickly. The man with the lantern was leading, and I could see that the blind beggar was with them. I heard him shout, "Down with the door!" The men rushed to the Admiral Benbow, and I heard them talk quietly. It seemed like they were surprised to find the door open. But the blind man quickly gave new orders. His voice was louder now, filled with anger. "In, he shouted. A few men obeyed and rushed inside, while the rest stayed outside with the blind man. Then I heard a shout from inside the house. "Bill's dead!" The blind man cursed again and shouted for the men to search the captain's body and get the chest. I could hear their feet running upstairs, and then I heard a loud crash. A man leaned out of the window and shouted to the blind man below. "Pew!" he cried. "They've already been here. Someone turned the chest out." The blind man was furious. "Is it there?" he asked. The man answered that the money was there, but the blind man wasn't happy. "Flint's fist, I mean," he said. Then another man came to the door and said, "Bill's been overhauled already. There's nothing left." The blind man was angry and shouted, "It's the people from the inn. It's that boy. I wish I had put his eyes out." Then he ordered the men to scatter and search for us. I could hear them running through the inn, knocking over furniture, kicking in doors, and shouting. Then I heard a whistle from outside. I had thought it was the blind man's signal, but it turned out to be a warning from the hilltop, telling the men that help was coming. "They'll have to leave now," said one of the men. "We'll have to run." "Run!" cried the blind man. "Dirk was a coward from the start. Find them, you dogs!" But the men were afraid, and only a few searched the house. Then I heard more horses coming. The sound of galloping horses got closer, and a pistol shot rang out. The buccaneers immediately ran in all directions. Only the blind man, Pew, was left behind. He was tapping his stick on the ground, calling for his men. Then he turned and ran toward the hamlet, shouting their names. As he ran, the horses came into view. Pew saw his mistake and tried to run away, but he didn't make it. One of the riders tried to avoid him, but Pew was knocked down and trampled by the horses. He died right there, and the horses kept going. I jumped up and saw the riders. They were coming to help. One of them was a boy from the hamlet, and the others were revenue officers who had heard about the smugglers. Thanks to them, my mother and I were saved. Pew was dead. Afterward, we carried my mother to the hamlet, and with some cold water, she soon felt better. She was scared but fine, though she was still upset about the money. The officers went to the cove where the smugglers had been, but they were too late. The lugger was already gone, and they only found a small trail. One of the officers joked that he was glad he had trodden on Pew's corns, since he was such a bad man. I went back with them to the Admiral Benbow. The house was a mess. The men had torn everything apart looking for us. They didn't take much except the captain's money, but the inn was ruined. The supervisor, Mr. Dance, didn't understand why the men had caused so much damage. They took the money, but what were they really looking for? Mr. Dance asked. I think they were after something else, I said. But I have something in my pocket that I'd like to keep safe. I'll take it, he said. I thought maybe Dr. Livesey could keep it safe, so we went to the hamlet to get the horses. Mr. Dance was going to report to Dr. Livesey, and we rode off to his house. Chapter: The Captain's Papers. We rode quickly until we reached Dr. Livesey's house. It was dark outside, and the house was quiet. Mr. Dance told me to jump off the horse and knock on the door. Dogger helped me down. The maid opened the door and told us Dr. Livesey was not home. He had been there in the afternoon, but had gone to the hall to eat with the squire. That's where we'll go, said Mr. Dance. We didn't ride this time because the hall was close. I ran with Dogger's stirrup and reached the gates. We walked up the long, quiet road to the hall. Mr. Dance knocked, and we were quickly let inside. A servant showed us to the library where the squire and Dr. Livesey were sitting by the fire. The squire was tall, over 6 feet, with a strong face. He looked very serious. Come in, Mr. Dance, said the squire. Good evening, Dance. said Dr. Livesey with a nod. "And good evening to you, Jim. What brings you here?" Mr. Dance told them the whole story, and when they heard about my mother going back to the inn, Dr. Livesey slapped his leg and the squire cried, "Bravo!" Mr. Dance finished his story, and the squire stood up excitedly, walking around the room. "Mr. Dance, you are a true hero," said the squire. "And this lad Jim, he's a great boy. Hawkins, ring the bell. Mr. Dance must have some ale." Dr. Livesey then asked, "Jim, do you have the thing they were after?" "Yes, sir," I said, and handed him the oilskin packet. Dr. Livesey carefully looked at the package, but didn't open it. Instead, he put it in his coat pocket. "Squire," said the doctor, "after Mr. Dance has had his ale, he must leave for his duties. But I'll keep Jim here to sleep at my house. We'll have some cold pie for dinner." The squire agreed. "Hawkins deserves more than cold pie," he said. A big pigeon pie was brought, and I ate a lot because I was very hungry. Mr. Dance was given his ale and left. "Now, squire," said Dr. Livesey. "Now, Livesey," said the squire. "One at a time, laughed Dr. Livesey. "You've heard of Flint, I suppose?" "Heard of him!" cried the squire. "He was the worst pirate ever. Even Blackbeard was scared of Flint. The Spanish were afraid of him too. I've seen his sails off Trinidad, and the men I sailed with turned back because they were too scared." "I've heard of him too," said the doctor. "But the question is, did he have money?" "Money!" cried the squire. "What else would they be after? They care only about money. They risk everything for it." "Exactly," said the doctor. "But let's see if there is money in this packet." Dr. Livesey opened the packet, and inside were two things, a book and a piece of sealed paper. "Let's start with the book," said the doctor. I came closer, and we all looked at the book. On the first page there were random writings. Billy Bones his fancy, no more rum, off Palm Key he got it, and other strange notes. We couldn't understand much. "That's not helpful," said Dr. Livesey. He turned the page, and the next pages had dates and amounts of money, but instead of explanations, there were just crosses. The book had records of ships or towns, and the amounts seemed to grow larger over time. "I can't make sense of this," said Dr. Livesey. "Clearly, these are records of places they attacked," said the squire. "The crosses are the names of the ships or towns, and the sums are their share of the loot. This is Flint's account book." Dr. Livesey agreed. "And the sums grew as Flint became more powerful." The book didn't have much more, except a few notes on places and money. "Thrifty man?" said the doctor. "He wasn't the one to be cheated." "Now for the paper," said the squire. The paper was sealed with a thimble. Dr. Livesey carefully opened the seals, and inside was a map of an island. It showed the island's shape, hills, harbors, and a hill named the Spyglass. The map had 3 red crosses, 2 in the north part of the island and 1 in the southwest. The words beside the southwest cross said, "Bulk of treasure here." There was more writing on the back, giving clues about where the treasure could be found. The squire looked excited. "Livesey, if this is true, I'll get a ship in Bristol and take you and Jim with me. We'll find the treasure." Dr. Livesey agreed. "I'll go with you, but I'm afraid of one thing." "And what's that?" asked the squire. "You," replied the doctor. "You can't keep quiet. We're not the only ones who know about this treasure. The men who attacked the inn tonight want the money too. We can't talk about it until we're safely at sea. "You're right," said the squire. "I won't say a word." Chapter I Go to Bristol. It took longer than the squire thought before we were ready to leave for the sea, and none of our first plans worked as we wanted. The doctor had to go to London to find a doctor for his practice. The squire was working hard in Bristol, and I stayed at the hall with old Redruth, the gamekeeper. I was almost like a prisoner, but I had many dreams about the sea, strange islands, and adventures. I spent hours looking at the map, remembering every detail. Sitting by the fire in the housekeeper's room, I imagined reaching the island from all directions. I explored every part of it. I climbed the big hill called the Spyglass, and from the top I saw beautiful views. Sometimes I imagined fighting with savages. Sometimes I imagined dangerous animals chasing us. But the real adventures we had were much stranger and sadder than my dreams. Weeks went by, and one day we got a letter for Dr. Livesey. The letter had a note that said, "If Dr. Livesey is not here, Tom Redruth or young Hawkins should open it." I opened the letter because Redruth couldn't read well. The letter said, "Old Anchor Inn, Bristol, March 1st, 17. Dear Livesey, I don't know if you are at the hall or still in London, so I'm sending this letter to both places. The ship is ready. She is anchored and waiting to sail. You won't believe how good the ship is. It's easy to sail, and it's called Hispaniola. It's 200 tons. I got the ship from my old friend, Blandley, who helped me a lot. He worked hard to help me, and so did everyone in Bristol when they heard about the treasure. The ship is ready. The workers were slow, but they finished. My only worry was finding the crew. I wanted 20 men in case we met natives, pirates, or the French. It was hard to find even 6 men until a lucky chance brought me the right person. I was standing on the dock when I started talking to a man. He was an old sailor who ran a pub. He was sick from working on land and wanted to go back to sea. He had lost one of his legs in the Navy, and I felt sorry for him, so I hired him as our cook. His name is Long John Silver, and he's great. He found the rest of the crew for me. They were old sailors, tough men who could fight. I feel healthy and strong, and I'm excited to sail. I don't care about the treasure. I just want to be on the sea. I hope you hurry up and come to see me. Send young Hawkins to see his mother and bring him to Bristol quickly. John Trelawney P.S. Blandley also found a good sailing master for us, and Long John Silver found a good man to be our mate. Things are ready for the ship. P.P.S. Hawkins can stay with his mother for one night. When I read the letter, I was so excited. I couldn't wait to go, but Redruth just complained. He didn't want to leave. Any of the other gamekeepers would have been happy to take his place, but only Redruth was chosen because the squire wanted it that way. The next day, Redruth and I went on foot to the Admiral Benbow Inn. I found my mother happy and healthy. The captain, who had caused so many problems before, was gone. The squire had fixed up the inn, painted the sign, and bought some new furniture, including a nice chair for my mother. He had also hired a boy to help her while I was away. When I saw the boy, I felt sad for the first time. I had been thinking about my adventure, but now I realized I was leaving home. I started to feel tears. I was not kind to the boy, and I'm sure I made his life hard. I had many chances to tell him what to do, and I did. That night, after dinner, Redruth and I started the journey again. I said goodbye to my mother and to the place where I grew up. The Admiral Benbow didn't feel the same after the repairs. I thought of the captain, who used to walk along the beach with his hat and sword. Then we turned the corner, and my home was out of sight. We took the mail coach, and I fell asleep because the ride was so smooth. When I woke up, we were in the city, and it was already morning. "We're in Bristol," Redruth said. "Get down." We walked through the docks to see Mr. Trelawney. On the way, I saw many ships, sailors working, and sailors singing. I had lived by the sea, but now I felt like I was really close to it for the first time. The smell of salt and tar was new to me. I saw old sailors with earrings and curly whiskers. It was so exciting, and I was going to see myself. I was going to sail on a schooner to an unknown island to search for treasure. We came to a big inn and saw Mr. Trelawney. He was dressed like a sailor and smiling. "Here you are," he said. "The doctor came last night. We have our full crew." "When do we leave?" I asked. "We leave tomorrow," said Mr. Trelawney. Chapter: At the Sign of the Spyglass. After breakfast, the squire gave me a note for Mr. John Silver at the Sign of the Spyglass. He told me I could find the tavern easily by walking along the docks and looking for a small tavern with a big brass telescope as the sign. I was very happy to go because I would see more ships and sailors. I walked through a busy crowd of people, carts, and packages until I found the tavern. The tavern was a small, bright place. The sign was freshly painted, the windows had neat red curtains, and the floor was clean. There were 2 streets, and both had doors open, so the big room inside was easy to see, even with a lot of tobacco smoke. Most of the customers were sailors, and they talked loudly. I stood at the door, almost too shy to go in. While I waited, a man came out of a side room. I knew right away that it was Long John. He had one leg cut off at the hip, and he used a crutch under his arm. He was very tall and strong, with a big face, plain but kind-looking. He seemed very cheerful, whistling and talking to his customers with a smile and a pat on the shoulder. When the squire first mentioned Long John in his letter, I was afraid he might be the same one-legged sailor I had seen at the Admiral Benbow, but when I saw him, I thought he looked very different from the pirates I had met before, like the captain, Black Dog, and the blind man, Pew. Long John was much nicer and seemed like a clean, friendly man. I took a deep breath and walked in. I went up to him while he was talking to a customer. "Mr. Silver, sir?" I asked, holding out the note. "Yes, my lad," he said. "That's my name. And who might you be?" When he saw the letter from the squire, he seemed surprised. "Oh!" he said loudly, shaking my hand. "You must be our new cabin boy. I'm happy to meet you." Just then, a customer near the door stood up and quickly ran outside. I recognized him right away. It was the man from the Admiral Benbow, the one with the pale face and 2 missing fingers. I shouted, "Stop him! It's Black Dog!" "I don't care who he is," said Silver, "but he hasn't paid his bill. Harry, go catch him." One of the other men near the door jumped up and ran after him. "If he were Admiral Hawke, he would still have to pay," shouted Silver. Then he turned back to me. "Who did you say he was? Black what?" "Dog, sir," I said. "Didn't Mr. Trelawney tell you about the pirates?" "He was one of them." "Oh, really?" said Silver. "In my house? Ben, go help Harry. Was he one of those pirates? Morgan, come here." A man named Morgan, an old sailor with gray hair, came forward, looking nervous. "Morgan," said Silver, "you've never seen this Black Dog before, right?" "No, sir," said Morgan, saluting. "And you didn't know his name?" "No, sir." Silver looked very serious. Good for you, Morgan. If you had been with someone like that, you would never come back in my house again. What did he say to you? I don't know, sir, said Morgan. What do you have for a brain? Said Silver. You don't know? What did he talk about? Ships, captains, voyages? Come on, what did he say? We were talking about keel hauling, said Morgan. Keel hauling, huh? That's the right thing to talk about for a pirate. Now get back to your seat, Morgan. Morgan went back to his seat. Silver then whispered to me, Morgan's a good man, just a bit stupid. But now, about Black Dog. I think I've seen him before. He used to come with a blind beggar. That's right, I said. The blind man's name was Pew. It was, said Silver, excited. Pew! He looked like a shark, didn't he? If we catch Black Dog, Captain Trelawney will hear about it. Ben's a good runner, he'll catch him. Silver was walking up and down on his crutch, slapping the tables and speaking so loudly that anyone would believe him. I began to feel suspicious of him again, but he seemed so clever and ready that by the time the two men came back, out of breath and saying they couldn't find Black Dog in the crowd, I almost believed Long John Silver was innocent. Now, Hawkins, said Silver, this is a real problem for me. What does Captain Trelawney think? Here I have a man drinking my rum, and I let him slip away. You need to tell him I did my best. I'm an old man now, but I could have caught him easily before. But now, with my bad leg... Then, suddenly he stopped, looking like he remembered something important. The bill, he shouted. 3 rums, I forgot to pay. And he sat on a bench and laughed so much that tears came from his eyes. I couldn't help but laugh too, and we laughed together, loud enough that the whole tavern heard us. I'm such a fool, he said, wiping his eyes. You and I will get along, Hawkins. I'll take my hat and walk with you to Captain Trelawney. We'll tell him about all this. It's serious business, and we didn't handle it well. But I'll tell you, this is a good laugh about my bill. We laughed some more, and then we walked along the docks. Long John talked to me about the ships we saw, their sizes, the work they were doing, and sailors' jobs. I learned a lot, and I started to think he was a good man to have on board. When we got to the inn, the squire and Dr. Livesey were sitting together, drinking ale. Long John told them the whole story, and I agreed with everything he said. The 2 gentlemen were sorry that Black Dog got away, but they agreed there was nothing to be done. After thanking Silver, the squire called out, All hands aboard by 4 this afternoon. Aye, aye, sir, Silver replied. Well, squire, said Dr. Livesey, I don't always trust your ideas, but I will say this. Long John Silver suits me. The man's a perfect gem, said the squire. And now, said the doctor, Jim can come aboard with us, right? Of course, said the squire. Take your hat, Hawkins, and let's see the ship. Chapter: Powder and Arms. The Hispaniola was anchored far out in the harbor. We passed by many ships, and their ropes sometimes scraped under our boat or swung over us. Finally, we reached the ship, and Mr. Arrow, the mate, came to greet us. He was a brown old sailor with earrings and a squint. He and the squire seemed to be good friends, but I noticed that things were different between the captain and Mr. Trelawney. The captain was a sharp-looking man who seemed angry about everything. He soon told us why, because just after we went down into the cabin, a sailor came to the door. Captain Smollett, sir, wants to speak to you, the sailor said. I'm always at the captain's service, said the squire. Let him in. The captain came in right away and closed the door behind him. Well, Captain Smollett, what's the matter? asked the squire. "Everything all right, I hope?" "Well, sir," said the captain, "I'll speak plainly, even if it offends you. I don't like this trip, I don't like the men, and I don't like my officer. That's it." "Maybe you don't like the ship?" asked the squire, looking angry. "I can't say, sir, because I haven't sailed her yet," replied the captain. "She seems good, but I can't say more." "Maybe you don't like your employer," said the squire. But Dr. Livesey stopped him. "Wait a minute," said Dr. Livesey. "There's no point in asking questions like that. The captain said too much or too little, and I want him to explain his words. You say you don't like this trip. Why?" "I was hired with sealed orders to sail this ship wherever I'm told," said the captain. "That's fine. But now I find that every sailor knows more than I do. That doesn't seem fair to me." "No," said Dr. Livesey. "That's not fair." "Next," said the captain, "I hear we're going after treasure. I don't like treasure hunts, and I don't like them when they're secret and when the secret is told to a parrot." "Silver's parrot?" asked the squire. "It's just a saying," said the captain. "I mean, it was blabbed. I don't think you gentlemen know what you're doing, but I'll tell you this. It's dangerous. Life or death." "That's clear enough and probably true," said Dr. Livesey. "We are taking the risk, but we're not as ignorant as you think. Next you say you don't like the crew. Are they bad sailors?" "I don't like them, sir," said Captain Smollett, "and I should have been the one to choose the crew." "Maybe you should have," said Dr. Livesey. "Maybe my friend should have brought you along to help choose the men, but the slight was not on purpose. And you don't like Mr. Arrow?" "I don't," said the captain. "He's a good sailor, but he's too friendly with the men. A mate should keep to himself, not drink with the crew." "Does he drink?" asked the squire. "No," said the captain. "I just mean he's too familiar with them." "Well, what do you want, Captain?" asked Dr. Livesey. "Tell us." "Gentlemen," said the captain, "are you sure you want to go on this trip?" "Of course," said the squire. "Good," said the captain. "Then let me tell you a few more things. They are putting the powder and arms in the front part of the ship. Why not put them under the cabin? First point. Second point. You brought some of your own men. Why not have them sleep near the cabin? Third point. There has been too much talking." "I agree," said Dr. Livesey. "I've heard that you have a map of an island with marks on it showing where treasure is hidden," said the captain. "And I know the exact location of the island." "I never told anyone that," cried the squire. "The crew knows it," said the captain. "Livesey, it must have been you or Hawkins," said the squire. "It doesn't matter who told them," said Dr. Livesey. "And I don't think anyone else told them." "Well, gentlemen," said the captain, "I don't know who has the map, but I insist that it be kept secret. I don't want to know where it is, and neither does Mr. Arrow. If you can't keep it secret, I'll resign." "I see," said Dr. Livesey. "You want us to keep the map a secret and make sure the stern part of the ship is well guarded with arms and powder. You're worried about a mutiny." "I'm not saying there will be a mutiny," said Captain Smollett. "I just want to make sure the ship is safe. I'm responsible for everyone's safety, and I see some things that don't seem right. I'm asking for precautions, or I'll resign." "Captain Smollett," said Dr. Livesey, smiling, "do you know the fable of the mountain and the mouse? When you came in here, you meant more than this." "Doctor," said the captain, "you're right. When I came in, I wanted to leave. I didn't think Mr. Trelawney would listen." "No more would I," said the squire. "If Livesey hadn't been here, I would have kicked you off the ship. But now I've heard you, and I'll do what you want, though I think less of you." "That's up to you, sir," said the captain. "You'll see that I do my duty." With that, the captain left. "Mr. Trelawney," said Dr. Livesey, "I think you've managed to bring 2 honest men aboard, Captain Smollett and John Silver." "Silver, maybe," said the squire, "but that captain is a liar and a fool." "Well," said the doctor, "we'll see." When we went back on deck, the men had started moving the powder and arms, singing while they worked. The captain and Mr. Arrow were supervising. I liked the new arrangement. The whole ship had been fixed up. 6 new beds had been made at the back of the ship, and now Redruth and I would sleep there. The captain and Mr. Arrow would sleep on deck in a bigger room. Even the mate seemed pleased with the changes. We were all working hard when the last men, including Long John, came back from the shore. The cook climbed aboard like a monkey and saw what was happening. "What's this?" he asked. "We're moving the powder, Jack," one of the men answered. "By the powers," said Long John, "if we do, we'll miss the morning tide." "Orders," said the captain. "You can go below. The men need dinner." "Aye, aye, sir," said Long John, and he went down to the galley. "That's a good man," said the doctor. "Maybe," said the captain, "but keep the powder safe, men." Then, noticing me looking at the swivel gun, he shouted, "Boy, get away from that! Go help the cook!" As I hurried off, I heard him tell the doctor loudly, "I'll have no favorites on my ship." I didn't like the captain at all, and agreed with the squire. I hated him. Chapter 10. The Voyage. All that night we were busy getting everything in its place, and many of the squire's friends, like Mr. Blandley, came to wish him a good trip. It was a lot of work, and I was very tired. But before dawn, the boatswain blew his whistle, and the crew started to work. Even though I was tired, I stayed on deck because everything was so new and exciting to me. The orders, the loud whistle, and the crew working by the light of the lanterns. "Sing us a song, Barbecue," one of the men shouted. "The old one," cried another. "All right, mates," said Long John, standing nearby with his crutch, and he started singing a song I knew well. 15 men on the dead man's chest. Then the crew joined in. "Yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum." With the third, "Ho!" they worked hard, moving the ship forward. This moment made me think of the old Admiral Benbow, where I first met the captain. But soon the anchor was up, the sails caught the wind, and the land disappeared. Before I could rest, the Hispaniola had started its voyage to Treasure Island. I won't tell you all the details of the voyage. It went mostly well. The ship was good, the crew were skilled, and the captain knew his job. But before we reached Treasure Island, there were a few things that happened. Mr. Arrow, the officer, turned out to be even worse than the captain thought. He had no control over the crew, and after a couple of days at sea, he started to act drunk. His face was red and he slurred his words. He was sent below deck many times because of this. Sometimes he fell and hurt himself. Other times he was sober for a short while and did his work. But we never figured out where he got the alcohol. When we asked him, he just laughed if he was drunk, and if he was sober, he swore he only drank water. He was not just a bad officer, he was also dangerous for himself, so no one was surprised when one night in a storm he disappeared and was never seen again. "Overboard," said the captain. Well, that saves us the trouble of putting him in irons. Now, we didn't have a mate. The boatswain, Job Anderson, took over and became the new officer. Mr. Trelawney, who knew the sea, helped a lot, taking a turn at the watch sometimes. Israel Hands, the coxswain, was an old sailor who could be trusted in emergencies. Now, let me tell you about our cook, Long John Silver, or Barbecue, as the men called him. He always had his crutch tied around his neck to have his hands free. He was very good at cooking, even in rough weather, and he could cross the deck using ropes tied to the ship. He was quick and clever, and some of the men who had sailed with him before said he was strong and brave, able to fight 4 men at once. He was very kind to me, always inviting me into the galley, which he kept very clean. His parrot, named Captain Flint after the famous pirate, would always say, "Pieces of 8, pieces of 8." It was funny, but also a little scary. Long John loved the parrot and would tell me stories of its adventures around the world. Meanwhile, the squire and Captain Smollett didn't get along very well. The squire didn't like the captain, and the captain only spoke when he had to. He did admit, though, that the crew had been better than he expected. He liked the ship, but he didn't trust the voyage. The squire would get angry about the captain's attitude, and the captain would always be serious, saying, "All I know is, we're not back home yet, and I don't like this trip." The ship was doing well in rough weather, and the crew was happy. They had extra rum, and there were apples for everyone to take. "Never knew good come of it," the captain said to Dr. Livesey. "Spoil the crew, make trouble." But something good came from the apple barrel, which we would learn later, and it might have saved our lives. We were getting close to the island we were looking for. It was the last day of our outward journey, and we were all excited. The ship was sailing steadily, and everyone was in high spirits. That night, just after sunset, I decided to have an apple. The crew were all looking out for the island. I got into the apple barrel, but there weren't many apples left. As I sat there, I heard a heavy man sit down next to me. The barrel shook, and when the man spoke, I realized it was Long John Silver. I stayed hidden, trembling with fear and curiosity. From what I heard, I understood that the lives of everyone on the ship were in danger, and I alone could stop it. Chapter 11. What I Heard in the Apple Barrel. "No, not me," said Silver. "Flint was the captain, I was the quartermaster with my wooden leg. That same battle where I lost my leg, old Pew lost his sight. He was a good doctor, though, a real professional. But he was hanged like a dog at Corso Castle. That was Robert's crew, and they changed their ship names all the time, like the Royal Fortune. I say, let a ship's name stay the same. It was like that with the Cassandra, which brought us home from Malabar after England took the Viceroy of the Indies. Flint's ship, the Walrus, was covered in blood and full of gold. "Flint was the best," cried a young voice. "Davis was a good man too," said Silver. "I didn't sail with him, but I worked with Flint, and now I'm on my own. I saved £900 from England and 2,000 from Flint. Not bad for a man who worked before the mast. It's not about earning, it's about saving. Look at Flint's crew now. Most of them are here and happy to get their food. Pew was poor, even though he spent £1,200 a year like a lord. But in the end, he starved. Isn't it useless, though?" said the young sailor. "It's useless for fools," Silver said. "But you're sharp. I see it when I look at you, and I'll talk to you like a man." I felt sick hearing Silver flatter another man the same way he had flattered me. I almost wished I could kill him right there. But he kept talking, not realizing I could hear him. "Here's how pirates live," Silver continued. "They live rough, risk their lives, but they eat and drink well. When their voyage ends, They have hundreds of pounds, not just a few farthings. Most spend it all on rum, but not me. I saved mine, kept it hidden. I'm 50 now. After this trip, I'll live like a gentleman. I've lived well all my life, except at sea." "Well," said the other, "but all that money's gone now, isn't it? You can't go back to Bristol." "Where do you think it went?" Silver said, laughing. "It was in Bristol, in banks," the man answered. "It was," said Silver. "But my wife has it now. The spyglass is sold, and she's waiting for me. I'd tell you where, but it would make the others jealous." "Can you trust your wife?" the man asked. "Pirates don't trust each other much," Silver said, "but I trust my wife. She's clever. If anyone slips up, they'll regret it. Pew was scared of me, even Flint. Flint's crew was rough, but they were scared of me, and when I was in charge, they respected me." The other man, Dick, said, "I didn't like this job until I heard you talk, John, but now I'll join you." "You're a good lad," said Silver, shaking Dick's hand. "A fine pirate." At this point, I understood what they meant by gentlemen of fortune. They were just pirates, and Silver was corrupting the last honest sailor. But I soon learned more as Silver whistled, and another man came over and sat with them. "Dick's good," Silver said. "I know Dick," said the coxswain, Israel Hands. "But how long are we going to wait around? I want to get into that cabin, with all the wine and food." "Israel," Silver said, "you'll stay forward, live hard, and keep quiet. Wait for my orders, and then we'll act." "When?" asked Israel. "Soon," said Silver. "We'll wait until we get the treasure. Then we'll act. I don't trust all of you, but we'll see how it goes." "But what will we do with them?" Dick asked. "Throw them ashore like maroons, or kill them like pork?" said Silver, laughing. "I'll do what I have to when the time comes," he added. "But when it's time, we'll make our move." "John, you're a man," said Israel. "You'll see," Silver replied. "But I claim Trelawney. I'll deal with him myself." At that moment, I felt terrible fear. I wanted to run away, but I was too scared and could barely move. Then I heard Dick move to get up, but someone stopped him. Israel said, "Don't get involved, John. Let's have some rum." "Dick," Silver said, "I trust you. Get me an apple to eat." As terrified as I was, I thought about how Mr. Arrow had gotten drunk, and it made me sick. Dick was gone for a little while, and while he was away, Israel said something to Silver in a low voice. I only heard a few words, but it sounded like not all of the crew were on Silver's side. When Dick returned, the three men took turns drinking, each making a toast. To luck, to Flint, and Silver said, "Here's to ourselves, plenty of rum and treasure." Just then, the moon rose and shone on the ship's sails. Almost at the same moment, the lookout shouted, "Land ho!" Chapter 12. Council of War. There was a rush of footsteps on the deck. I heard people running from the cabin and from the front of the ship. I quickly ran out from behind the barrel and hid near the sail. I ran to the back of the ship and joined Hunter and Dr. Livesey to go to the front of the ship. All the crew were already there. The fog lifted, and the moon came out. We could see two small hills in the distance, and behind one there was a taller hill with its top still in the fog. The hills were shaped like sharp cones. I was still scared from the things I had just heard, but I saw Captain Smollett giving orders. The ship turned a little and sailed in a course that would pass the island to the east. "Has anyone seen that land ahead?" asked the captain. "I have, sir," said Silver. "I was cook on a ship that came here." "The anchorage is on the south, behind a small island, right?" asked the captain. "Yes, sir," Silver said. "They call it Skeleton Island. It used to be a place for pirates. That big hill is called the Spyglass because the pirates used it as a lookout." Captain Smollett took out a chart. "Is this the right place?" Silver looked closely at the chart, but I could tell he was disappointed. This was not the same map we had found in Billy Bones's chest. This was an exact copy, but it didn't have the marks or the notes that the pirate map had. Silver quickly hid his disappointment. "Yes, sir," said Silver. "This is the place. I know it well. It's a good spot for cleaning ships, as you guessed." "Thank you," said the captain. "You may go now." Silver walked closer to me, and I felt nervous. He didn't know I had overheard him in the apple barrel, but I was scared of him. He was cruel, clever, and dangerous. "This is a lovely island," Silver said to me. "You'll be able to swim, climb trees, and hunt goats. It makes me feel young again. You'll have a good time here. If you want to explore, just ask me, and I'll pack you some food." He patted me on the shoulder in a friendly way and went forward, then down below deck. Captain Smollett, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were talking on the quarterdeck. I wanted to tell them what I had heard, but I didn't want to interrupt. As I was thinking of how to do it, Dr. Livesey called me over. He had left his pipe below deck and wanted me to fetch it. But as soon as I was close enough, I quickly said, "Doctor, let me speak to you. Get the captain and the squire to the cabin, and then send for me. I have terrible news." The doctor looked a little surprised, but then he quickly recovered. "Thank you, Jim," said the doctor loudly, as if he had asked me a question. He turned and went back to the captain and the squire. They spoke quietly for a while, and soon the captain gave an order to Job Anderson, and everyone was called to the deck. "My lads," said Captain Smollett, "we've found the island we were looking for. Mr. Trelawney, being the generous man he is, has asked me if everyone has done their duty, and I told him yes. Now, the three of us will go below to drink your health, and you'll have grog to drink to our health. I think it's a fair thing, and if you agree, give a big cheer for Mr. Trelawney." The crew cheered loudly, and I could hardly believe that these same men were plotting against us. "One more cheer for Captain Smollett," called Long John Silver. The cheer was loud and strong. The three gentlemen went below deck, and soon I was called to the cabin. Inside, the captain, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were sitting around a table with a bottle of wine and raisins. Dr. Livesey was smoking his pipe with his wig in his lap, which meant he was worried. The window was open, and I could see the moon shining on the ship's wake. "Now, Jim," said the squire, "you have something to tell us. Go ahead." I told them everything I had overheard from Silver. They all listened carefully and said nothing while I spoke. "Jim," said Dr. Livesey, "take a seat." They made me sit with them at the table, gave me a glass of wine and some raisins. Then all three of them raised their glasses and toasted me for my courage. "Now, Captain," said the squire, "you were right and I was wrong. I admit it." "No more wrong than I am, sir," said Captain Smollett. "I've seen many crews planning mutiny, and they always give signs. But this crew, I'm not sure." "Captain," said the doctor, "with your permission, that's Silver, a very clever man." "He would look good from the yardarm," said the captain. "But enough talk. Let me explain my plan." The captain began explaining the plan. "We can't turn back now, so we have to keep going, but we have time before the treasure is found. There are still loyal men on board. We need to be ready for a fight. We can count on your servants, Mr. Trelawney." "As much as I count on myself," said the squire. "We're only 7 of us, but we know the honest men on board," said Captain Smollett. "We need to be careful, and we need to act when the time is right." "We must trust in Jim," said the doctor. "The men are not afraid of him, and Jim is observant." The squire looked at me. "I have great faith in you, Jim," he said. I felt helpless. We only had 7 people we could trust, and one of them was a boy, so the odds were still against us. But somehow it was through me that our safety might come. Chapter 12. Council of War. There was a rush of footsteps on the deck. I heard people running from the cabin and from the front of the ship. I quickly ran out from behind the barrel and hid near the sail. I ran to the back of the ship and joined Hunter and Dr. Livesey to go to the front of the ship. All the crew were already there. The fog lifted and the moon came out. We could see 2 small hills in the distance, and behind one there was a taller hill with its top still in the fog. The hills were shaped like sharp cones. I was still scared from the things I had just heard, but I saw Captain Smollett giving orders. The ship turned a little and sailed in a course that would pass the island to the east. "Has anyone seen that land ahead?" asked the captain. "I have, sir," said Silver. "I was cook on a ship that came here." "The anchorage is on the south, behind a small island, right?" asked the captain. "Yes, sir," Silver said. "They call it Skeleton Island. It used to be a place for pirates. That big hill is called the Spyglass because the pirates used it as a lookout." Captain Smollett took out a chart. "Is this the right place?" Silver looked closely at the chart, but I could tell he was disappointed. This was not the same map we had found in Billy Bones's chest. This was an exact copy, but it didn't have the marks or the notes that the pirate map had. Silver quickly hid his disappointment. "Yes, sir," said Silver. "This is the place. I know it well. It's a good spot for cleaning ships, as you guessed." "Thank you," said the captain. "You may go now." Silver walked closer to me, and I felt nervous. He didn't know I had overheard him in the apple barrel, but I was scared of him. He was cruel, clever, and dangerous. "This is a lovely island," Silver said to me. "You'll be able to swim, climb trees, and hunt goats. It makes me feel young again. You'll have a good time here. If you want to explore, just ask me, and I'll pack you some food." He patted me on the shoulder in a friendly way and went forward, then down below deck. Captain Smollett, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were talking on the quarter-deck. I wanted to tell them what I had heard, but I didn't want to interrupt. As I was thinking of how to do it, Dr. Livesey called me over. He had left his pipe below deck and wanted me to fetch it. But as soon as I was close enough, I quickly said, "Doctor, let me speak to you. Get the captain and the squire to the cabin, and then send for me. I have terrible news." The doctor looked a little surprised, but then he quickly recovered. "Thank you, Jim," said the doctor loudly, as if he had asked me a question. He turned and went back to the captain and the squire. They spoke quietly for a while, and soon the captain gave an order to Job Anderson, and everyone was called to the deck. "My lads," said Captain Smollett, "we've found the island we were looking for. Mr. Trelawney, being the generous man he is, has asked me if everyone has done their duty, and I told him yes. Now, the 3 of us will go below to drink your health, and you'll have grog to drink to our health. I think it's a fair thing, and if you agree, give a big cheer for Mr. Trelawney." The crew cheered loudly, and I could hardly believe that these same men were plotting against us. "One more cheer for Captain Smollett," called Long John Silver. The cheer was loud and strong. The three gentlemen went below deck, and soon I was called to the cabin. Inside, the captain, the squire, and Dr. Livesey were sitting around a table with a bottle of wine and raisins. Dr. Livesey was smoking his pipe with his wig in his lap, which meant he was worried. The window was open, and I could see the moon shining on the ship's wake. "Now, Jim," said the squire, "you have something to tell us. Go ahead." I told them everything I had overheard from Silver. They all listened carefully and said nothing while I spoke. "Jim," said Dr. Livesey, "take a seat." They made me sit with them at the table, gave me a glass of wine and some raisins. Then all three of them raised their glasses and toasted me for my courage. "Now, Captain," said the squire, "you were right, and I was wrong. I admit it." "No more wrong than I am, sir," said Captain Smollett. "I've seen many crews planning mutiny, and they always give signs. But this crew, I'm not sure." "Captain," said the doctor, "with your permission, that's Silver, a very clever man." "He would look good from the yardarm," said the captain. "But enough talk. Let me explain my plan." The captain began explaining the plan. "We can't turn back now, so we have to keep going. But we have time before the treasure is found. There are still loyal men on board. We need to be ready for a fight. We can count on your servants, Mr. Trelawney?" "As much as I count on myself," said the squire. "We're only 7 of us, but we know the honest men on board," said Captain Smollett. "We need to be careful, and we need to act when the time is right." "We must trust in Jim," said the doctor. "The men are not afraid of him, and Jim is observant." The squire looked at me. "I have great faith in you, Jim," he said. I felt helpless. We only had 7 people we could trust, and one of them was a boy. So the odds were still against us. But somehow, it was through me that our safety might come. Chapter 13. How I Began My Shore. Adventure. The next morning, the island looked very different from before. The wind had stopped, and we had moved a long way during the night. We were now very close to the eastern coast of the island, about half a mile away. The trees on the island were dark and gray, and there were some tall pine trees in sandy areas. The hills were sharp and rocky. The tallest hill, called the Spyglass, was steep and flat on top like a pedestal for a statue. The ship, the Hispaniola, was rocking in the sea. The ship was creaking and groaning. I had to hold on tight to avoid falling, and I felt dizzy, especially because I hadn't eaten yet. Looking at the island made me feel uneasy. The island was dark and sad-looking, with gray trees and sharp rocks. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore made me feel nervous, even though the sun was shining and the birds were singing. It should have been exciting to get to land, but instead, I felt scared and hated the thought of being on the island. We had to work hard that morning because there was no wind, and we had to get the boats out and row around the island. I volunteered to go, even though I didn't have to. It was very hot, and the men were unhappy. Anderson, who was in charge of my boat, complained loudly. "Well," he said, "it's not forever." I thought this was a bad sign because before that, the crew had worked hard and quickly. But now, just seeing the island seemed to make them lazy. Long John Silver was in charge of the ship's course. He knew the island well and guided the ship through the narrow passage. He didn't hesitate once, even though the water was deeper than the chart showed. Finally, we anchored the ship, and it was a quiet place, surrounded by trees. The water was calm, and the area was completely hidden. There were 2 little swamps emptying into the water. Everything around us smelled bad, like rotting wood, and the doctor sniffed the air. "I don't know about treasure," he said, "but I'm sure there's fever here." After we got back on the ship, the men were not behaving well. They were lying around, grumbling. They didn't listen to orders and didn't do their work properly. It was clear that mutiny was a real threat. Long John Silver, however, was trying hard to keep everyone in a good mood. He was all smiles, helping where he could, singing songs to distract the crew. But I could see that his friendly attitude was a sign of worry. He was trying to keep things under control. We had a meeting in the cabin to talk about the situation. Captain Smollett said, "If I give another order, the crew will turn on us. If I don't speak, Silver will figure it out, and everything will fall apart. We can only trust one man." "Who is that?" asked the squire. "Silver," said the captain. "He's just as worried as we are. What I think we should do is give the men an afternoon ashore. If they all go, we'll fight the ship. If none of them go, we'll stay in the cabin. If some go, Silver will bring them back." The plan was made. We gave guns to the trusted men. Hunter, Joyce, and Red Ruth were with us, and they agreed to help. The captain went on deck to announce the plan to the crew. "My lads," said Captain Smollett, "we've had a long day, and we're all tired. The boats are ready, and anyone who wants to go ashore for the afternoon can. I'll fire a gun when it's time to return." The crew was happy to hear this and cheered loudly. They were excited to go ashore, thinking they would find treasure. The captain quickly left, and Long John Silver took over the arrangement. It was clear now that Silver was the one in control, and he was using the situation to his advantage. Soon, the boats were ready to go ashore. 6 men stayed on the ship, and the rest, including Silver, got into the boats. I saw my chance and decided to go ashore too. I slipped into the nearest boat without anyone noticing, except the bow oar, who quietly told me to keep my head down. Silver saw me and called out, but I didn't stop. I ran straight into the trees as soon as the boat reached the shore. "Jim! Jim!" I heard Silver shouting, but I ignored him and ran deeper into the island until I couldn't run anymore. Chapter 14. The First Blow. I was happy that I had managed to escape from Long John Silver, and I started to enjoy myself as I looked around at the strange land. I had walked through a swampy area with willows, rushes, and strange trees. Now I had come out onto a sandy piece of land, about a mile long. There were some pine trees and many other twisted trees that looked like oak trees, but their leaves were pale, like willows. In the distance, I saw a hill with 2 sharp peaks shining in the sun. I felt happy to be exploring. The island was empty of people, and my shipmates were far behind. All I saw were animals and birds. I wandered around the trees, seeing flowers I didn't recognize and snakes, one of which hissed at me. I didn't know it was dangerous at the time, but it was a rattlesnake. Then I came to a thicket of trees, like evergreen oaks. The trees grew low to the ground like brambles, and their branches were twisted. The thicket stretched down from a small hill to the edge of a marsh where a river flowed. The sun was strong, and the air was thick with steam from the wet land. In the distance, I saw the tall spyglass hill. Suddenly, I heard a noise in the swamp. Ducks flew up with loud quacks, and soon a lot of birds were flying in the air. I guessed that some of my shipmates were near. I crawled behind a tree to hide and listened quietly. I could hear voices, and I recognized Silver's voice. He was talking to someone, but I couldn't hear what they were saying. They were speaking loudly, almost angrily, but their words were hard to make out. After a while, the voices seemed to stop, and the birds started to calm down. I decided that I should get closer to listen to their conversation, since I had come ashore and had to learn what the men were planning. I crawled slowly towards them, and finally, I reached a spot where I could see them clearly. Silver was standing with another man, and they were talking face to face in a small green area. Silver had taken off his hat and was speaking to the other man with a serious look on his face. "Mate," Silver was saying, "I'm telling you this because I think highly of you. If I didn't, I wouldn't warn you. Everything's going wrong, and if one of the wild men finds out, I'll be in trouble. You need to listen." The other man, who was red in the face and sounding very hoarse, replied, "Silver, you're old and you have money and you're brave. But do you really want to follow these people? Not me. I'd rather lose my hand than follow them." Just then, a loud noise broke their conversation. I heard a terrible scream in the distance. The sound echoed across the marsh, and all the birds flew into the air again. Silver didn't move, but the other man, Tom, jumped up in shock. "Who was that?" Tom asked. Silver smiled, but his eyes were sharp and dangerous. "That? Oh, that'll be Alan," he said. "Alan!" Tom cried. "He was a true sailor. And you? Did you kill him? I won't follow you anymore. If you kill Alan, kill me too, but I won't go with you." With that, Tom turned to walk toward the beach. But before he could go far, Silver grabbed a branch, threw his crutch, and hit Tom in the back. Tom fell to the ground, and Silver quickly jumped on him and stabbed him twice. I felt sick and dizzy. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It was horrible. Afterwards, Silver stood up and cleaned his knife, not caring about Tom's body lying there. The sun was still shining, and everything seemed normal, but a murder had just happened. Then Silver blew a whistle, and I knew more men would be coming. I was terrified. If they found me, I could be next. I quickly crawled back to the woods and started running away as fast as I could. I was so scared. How could I go back to the boats with the murderers still around? Wouldn't they kill me if they saw me? I couldn't think straight. I thought everything was lost. While running, I didn't pay attention to where I was going. I just wanted to get as far away from them as possible. Soon, I found myself at the base of a hill with two peaks. The trees here were spaced out, and the air smelled fresher than near the marsh. But then I heard something that stopped me in my tracks and made my heart race. Chapter 15. The Man of the Island. As I walked, I suddenly heard gravel fall, and I saw a figure quickly hide behind a tree. I couldn't tell if it was a man, a bear, or a monkey. It was just dark and shaggy. This made me stop and feel scared. I realized that I was stuck between the killers behind me and this strange figure in front of me. I started to feel that I'd rather face the people I knew, the killers, than something new and unknown. Silver seemed less scary compared to this creature. I quickly turned and started walking back to the boats, but the figure appeared again and started moving in front of me, blocking my way. It was fast and moved like a deer, but it walked on two legs. I was sure it was a man, but I had never seen anyone like him. I started thinking about cannibals. I almost shouted for help, but then remembered I had a pistol. Feeling braver, I decided to face the figure and walk toward him. He was hiding behind another tree, but when I moved toward him, he came out and knelt down, holding his hands together in front of him. This surprised me. "Who are you?" I asked. "Ben Gunn," he said in a rough voice. "I'm poor Ben Gunn, and I haven't spoken to a Christian in 3 years." I now saw that he was a white man like me. His skin was very sunburned, and his eyes looked strange in his dark face. He wore old clothes made from ship sails, and his outfit was held together with buttons and pieces of wood. 3 years, I said. "Were you shipwrecked?" "No," he replied. "Marooned." I knew that being marooned meant being left on an island alone as punishment. It was common among pirates. 3 years ago, he continued, they left me with goats and berries. I've lived on that, but I'm tired of it. I'd love some cheese if you've got any. If I can get back to the ship, I promised, I'll bring you cheese. He looked at my jacket, boots, and hands like a child seeing something new. When I mentioned cheese, he looked interested. "If you get back to the ship," he said, "why, who's stopping you?" "Not you, I know," I answered. "That's right," he said, happy. "You're a good lad, Jim. Now, would you believe I had a pious mother?" he asked. I didn't quite understand, so I just said, "No, not really." Well, I did. I was a good boy once, but I went the wrong way. Now, though, I'm thinking of being good again. I won't drink rum much anymore, just a little, for luck. Then he whispered, "I'm rich." I thought he had gone crazy from being alone for so long, but he continued, "I'll make a man of you, Jim. You'll thank your stars for finding me." His face turned serious as he grabbed my hand. "Now, Jim," he asked, "that's not Flint's ship, is it?" I quickly understood that I had found an ally, so I told him everything about our journey and the problems we were facing. He listened carefully, and when I finished, he patted me on the head. "You're a good lad, Jim," he said. "You're stuck in trouble, but I can help. If the squire's willing to help, I can do a lot." "Is he likely to help, Jim?" I told him the squire was a very generous man. "Well then," said Ben Gunn, "I'll tell you this much. I was with Flint when he buried the treasure. He did it with 6 strong men. They were gone for a week, and when they came back, they were dead." Ben then told me more about the treasure and how he had been left alone on the island for 3 years. He seemed to know a lot about the island, but it was clear he was a bit mad. "You just tell the squire about me," he said. "I've been here long enough. Now here's my boat. If things get bad, we can use it to escape, but I'll tell you more later." Just then, I heard a loud cannon shot from the direction of the ship. "They've started fighting," I said. Ben Gunn and I ran toward the boats. As I ran, he talked about how he had killed his first goat and how he once prayed in a small spot on the island, pretending it was a chapel. But I wasn't really listening because I was focused on what was happening. Another cannon shot was followed by a volley of small arms. Then, ahead of me, I saw the Union Jack flag waving above the trees. Chapter 16. Narrative continued by the doctor. How the ship was abandoned. It was around 1:30, 3 bells, when the 2 boats went ashore from the Hispaniola. The captain, the squire, and I were discussing what to do in the cabin. If the wind had been blowing, we could have attacked the 6 mutineers left on the ship and sailed away. But there was no wind, and to make things worse, Hunter came to tell us that Jim Hawkins had snuck into a boat and gone ashore with the others. We didn't doubt Jim, but we were worried about his safety. With the men so angry, we didn't know if we'd see him again. We quickly went on deck. The place smelled terrible, and the ship was creaking and groaning. The mutineers were sitting in the forecastle grumbling. We could see their boats tied up by the river, with one man sitting in a boat, whistling Lili Bolero. It was a tense situation, so the captain decided that Hunter and I should go ashore in the jolly boat to find out what was going on. The other two boats had drifted to the right, but Hunter and I rowed straight ahead, heading toward the stockade. The two men guarding their boats saw us and stopped whistling. They discussed what to do, but decided to stay put and continue whistling. We had lost sight of the boats, so I steered the boat between some trees to hide us. We reached land and I jumped out, walking quickly with pistols ready for safety. Soon, I found the stockade. It was a strong wooden house built around a spring of fresh water. The house could hold 20 people, and it had holes in the walls for shooting. A tall fence around the stockade kept the enemies out, but they could still be shot from inside. The people inside had the advantage. All they needed was food and a good watch. I thought about our situation. We had plenty of food and weapons on the Hispaniola, but we had no fresh water. I was thinking about this when I heard a man's cry from a distance. I feared it was Jim Hawkins. I rushed back to the boat, and Hunter rowed quickly. We got back to the ship, and everyone seemed shaken. The squire was pale, blaming himself for getting us into this mess. One of the mutineers looked almost faint from the noise. Captain Smollett and I discussed a plan. We decided to load a boat with supplies. Redruth, our trusted man, was stationed between the cabin and the forecastle, with muskets and a mattress for protection. Hunter and I worked quickly, bringing powder, food, muskets, and my medicine chest. On deck, the captain warned the mutineers. "Mr. Hands," he called, "we have pistols. If anyone signals, that man will be dead." The mutineers went below deck, probably planning to attack us, but when they saw Redruth waiting with muskets, they quickly backed down. We loaded the boat with more supplies and made our way back to shore. As we approached, one of the mutineers ran ashore and disappeared. I almost changed my plan and destroyed their boats, but I was worried about Silver and the others being nearby. I decided it was better to stick to the plan. We got to shore and began carrying supplies to the stockade. Hunter and I made multiple trips, carrying as much as we could. Joyce stayed to guard the supplies with the muskets, and I returned to the Hispaniola to get more. Back on the ship, the squire and I quickly loaded the boat with food, powder, and weapons. We dropped some of the powder and weapons into the sea so they wouldn't be discovered. The tide was beginning to go out, and the ship started swinging. We could hear voices from the direction of the mutineers' boats, but we knew we had to leave quickly. The captain called out to a man named Abraham Gray, who was one of the mutineers. "Gray," the captain shouted, "I know you're a good man. I'm leaving the ship now, and I want you to come with me." After a short silence, there was a scuffle. Gray came running to the captain with a knife wound on his cheek. "I'm with you, sir," he said. Together they joined us in the boat, and we rowed away from the ship. But we still had a long way to go before we reached the stockade. Chapter 17. The doctor continues the story. The Jolly Boat's last trip. This trip was very different from the others. First, the small boat we were in was overloaded. There were 5 men in it, and 3 of them, Trelawney, Redruth, and the captain, were very tall, more than 6 feet. The boat was already too full, Then we had bags of powder, pork, and bread. The boat was almost sinking. We got water in the boat several times, and my pants and coat were soaking wet after just a short time. The captain told us to balance the boat better, and we tried to make it sit level. But we were still scared to move too much. Second, the current was strong. It was moving quickly to the west, then south towards the sea. The current was a danger for our overloaded boat. The worst part was that the current pushed us off course, and we moved away from our landing place. If we didn't correct it, we might end up near the pirates' boats. "I can't keep the boat heading for the stockade, Captain," I said. I was steering the boat while the captain and Red Ruth rowed. "The tide is pulling us off course. Can you row harder?" "No, we'll sink the boat if we row too hard," said the captain. "Keep trying and we'll get there. Row until you see we're moving in the right direction." I tried, but the current kept pushing us off course. We had to steer almost east, which was the opposite of the direction we wanted. "We won't make it this way," I said. "If this is the only way, we must keep going this way," said the captain. "We can't let the current push us too far. If we go the other way, we don't know where we'll land, and we might meet the pirates. If we keep this way, the current will slow and we can turn back." "The current is slower now," said Gray, who was sitting at the front. "You can turn the boat a little more." "Thank you, Gray," I said, treating him like one of us. We had all agreed to work together. Suddenly, the captain spoke again, and I thought his voice was different. "The gun," he said. "I thought about that," I said. "I thought he was worried about a bombardment from the fort. They can't move the gun, and they can't get it through the trees." "Look behind us, Doctor," said the captain. We had forgotten about the gun, but now we saw the pirates getting ready to move it. They were taking off the tarpaulin cover. Worse, I realized that the round shot and powder for the gun had been left behind, and with one blow of an axe, the pirates could take everything. "Israel was Flint's gunner," said Gray. We steered the boat toward the landing place. By now we were far enough from the current that we could move the boat slowly, and I kept it steady. But the worst part was that we were now sideways to the Hispaniola, with our whole boat exposed. I heard the pirates getting ready to fire the gun. "Who's the best shot?" asked the captain. "Trelawney," I said. "Trelawney, can you try to shoot one of the pirates, especially Hands?" said the captain. Trelawney was calm. He checked his gun. "Easy with the gun, Mr. Trelawney, or the boat will sink," said the captain. "Everyone else, be ready to help balance the boat." Trelawney took aim, and we all leaned to the side to balance the boat. We were so careful that no water came in. The pirates had turned the gun, and Hands was closest to the end, but we didn't have luck. When Trelawney shot, Hands ducked, and another pirate fell instead. He shouted, and his friends on the boat cried out, and many voices came from the shore. "Here come the boats," I said. "Row quickly," said the captain. "We can't worry about sinking now. We have to get to shore." "One boat only has a crew," I said. "The other boat is probably going around the shore to stop us." "They'll have a hard time catching us," said the captain. "The land is ahead, and it's not the pirates I'm worried about, it's the gun. If they hit us with that, we're done. Tell us when you see them aim, and we'll stop rowing." We rowed quickly, getting close to the shore. We could already see the sand where we could land. The pirates' boat wasn't close anymore. The tide was helping us now, but the gun was still a threat. "I wish I could stop and shoot another pirate," said the captain. But the pirates didn't seem to care about their fallen friend. They kept working on the gun. We knew we had to keep moving. "Ready," said the squire. "Wait," said the captain. "Hold on, everyone." With one big push, the captain and Redruth made the boat tip, and we heard the gunshot just as the boat sank. The shot missed, but the boat sank slowly in 3 feet of water, and the other men fell into the water. We were safe, but all our supplies were at the bottom of the water. Only 2 of our 5 guns were still usable. I had kept my gun, and the captain had his too. The other 3 guns had gone down with the boat. To make things worse, we could hear voices coming from the woods, and we were afraid we would be cut off from the stockade. We worried about Hunter and Joyce. Hunter was steady, but we weren't sure if Joyce would be ready to fight. We quickly waded to the shore, leaving the boat and many of our supplies behind. Chapter 18. The Doctor continues the story. End of the first day's fighting. We hurried through the woods to get to the stockade, and we could hear the pirates getting closer. We heard them running and the branches breaking as they moved through the trees. I realized we were going to fight soon, so I checked my gun. "Captain," I said, "Trelawney is a good shot. Give him your gun because his gun doesn't work." They switched guns, and Trelawney calmly checked his new gun. I also noticed Gray didn't have a weapon, so I gave him my sword. He looked strong and ready, and we all felt better. After walking a little farther, we reached the edge of the woods and saw the stockade in front of us. We came to the middle of the south side, and just then, 7 pirates led by Job Anderson came running toward us. They stopped, surprised. Before they could react, the squire, Hunter, Joyce, and I fired our guns. The shots were not very accurate, but they worked. 1 pirate fell, and the others quickly ran back into the trees. After reloading our guns, we walked to the fallen pirate. He was dead, shot in the heart. We were happy with our success, but suddenly a pistol shot rang out from the bushes. A bullet flew past my ear, and poor Tom Redruth fell to the ground. The squire and I fired back, but we couldn't see anyone to aim at, so it was probably a waste of gunpowder. We reloaded and ran to help Tom. The captain and Gray were already checking him. It was clear that Tom was dead. I think our quick response scared the pirates away again, because we were able to carry Tom over the stockade and into the log house without any more trouble. Poor Tom hadn't complained or shown fear at all. He had quietly followed every order since we began this adventure. He was the oldest of us, and now he was the one to die. The squire knelt beside Tom and kissed his hand, crying. "Am I going, Doctor?" Tom asked. "You're going home, Tom," I answered. "I wish I had shot at them with the gun first," Tom said. "Tom," said the squire, "will you forgive me?" "I don't know if it would be respectful, sir," Tom replied. "But if you want it, so be it." After a little silence, Tom asked if someone could read a prayer. "It's the custom," he said. Soon after, he passed away quietly. While this was happening, the captain, who looked very full from his pockets and chest, took out many things from his bags. He had British colors, a Bible, rope, ink, a logbook, and some tobacco. He found a tall fir tree and, with Hunter's help, set it up at the corner of the log house. Then, he climbed on the roof and put up the British flag. This seemed to make him feel better. He went back into the log house and started counting the supplies as if nothing had happened. But he was still thinking about Tom, and when Tom passed away, the captain covered him with another flag. "Don't be sad, sir," the captain said to the squire. "It's good that he died doing his duty. That's a fact, even if it's not good religion." The captain then pulled me aside. Dr. Livesey, he asked, how many weeks until the other ship arrives? I told him it would be months, not weeks, and that if we weren't back by the end of August, someone would come to look for us. I said he could figure it out from there. Ah, said the captain, scratching his head. We're not as safe as we thought. We lost that second load of supplies. We have enough gunpowder, but we're running low on food. It's probably better that we don't have an extra person with us. He pointed to Tom's body. Just then, a cannonball flew over the roof of the log house and landed far beyond us in the woods. Oh no, said the captain. Go ahead and fire, pirates. You don't have much gunpowder left. On their second try, they aimed better, and the ball landed inside the stockade, throwing up sand but causing no real damage. The house is hidden from the ship now, the squire said. They must be aiming at the flag. Should we take it down? Take down my flag? No, cried the captain. We won't do that. And we all agreed with him. The flag was a sign of defiance, showing the pirates we weren't afraid of them. All evening, the pirates fired at us, but their shots mostly missed. Some landed in the sand, and one even went through the roof of the log house and out the floor. We quickly got used to it, like it was just part of the adventure. The good thing about all this, said the captain, is that the area in front of us is probably clear now. The tide has gone out, and we can get our supplies. Volunteers to go get the pork? Gray and Hunter went first, armed and careful. But the pirates were bolder than we thought. Some of them were already taking our supplies and carrying them to their boat, with Silver in charge. They all had muskets now. The captain sat down to write in his logbook. Here is what he wrote. Alexander Smollett, captain. David Livesey, doctor. Abraham Gray, carpenter's mate. John Trelawney, owner. John Hunter and Richard Joyce, servants of the owner. Landsmen. These are the only ones still loyal. We have enough food for 10 days, but the rations are very short. Thomas Redruth, servant, shot by the mutineers. James Hawkins, cabin boy. At the same time, I was thinking about Jim Hawkins and wondering what had happened to him. Then we heard a shout from the land. Someone's calling us, said Hunter, who was on guard. Doctor, Squire, Captain, is that you? Came the voice. I ran to the door and saw Jim Hawkins climbing over the stockade, safe and sound. Chapter 19. Jim Hawkins continues the story. The garrison in the stockade. As soon as Ben Gunn saw the flag, he stopped, grabbed my arm, and sat down. Look, he said, there are your friends. I think it's the pirates, I said. Pirates? He cried. No. If it was the pirates, Silver would have the Jolly Roger flag up. This is your friends. I think your friends have won the fight. They are in the old stockade, the one Flint made. He was smart, Flint. Except for rum, no one was as clever as him. He was afraid of no one, not even Silver. Silver was the polite one. Well, I said, maybe you're right. I should hurry and join my friends. No, said Ben. You're a good boy, but you're just a boy. I'm smart. Rum wouldn't make me go there. Not until I talk to your gentleman and hear his word of honor. And you'll remember my words. A precious sight, you'll say. A precious sight of confidence. And then you pinch him. And he pinched me again. When Ben Gunn is needed, you know where to find him, he said. Just like today. And when you come, have a white thing in your hand and come alone. And you'll say, Ben Gunn has reasons of his own. Well, I said, I understand. You want to see the squire or the doctor? You'll be where I found you, right? Yes, he said. From noon to about 6 bells. Good, I said. Can I go now? You won't forget, he asked. Say a precious sight and reasons of his own. That's the important part. If you see silver, you won't sell Ben Gunn out, will you? You won't? And if the pirates come ashore, what would you say? That there'll be widows in the morning? Just then, there was a loud sound, and a cannonball flew through the trees, landing not far from us. We both ran in different directions. For an hour, we heard cannon fire, and cannonballs kept crashing through the trees. I moved from hiding place to hiding place, always hearing the loud sound of the cannonballs. By the time the cannon fire ended, I felt a little braver, but I still didn't want to go near the stockade where the cannonballs were landing. I went east and found some trees by the shore. The sun was setting, the sea breeze was blowing, and the air was cool. I could still see the Hispaniola ship, and sure enough, the Jolly Roger flag of the pirates was flying. Then there was another cannon shot, and I heard the echoes. I watched for a while as the pirates cleaned up after the attack. They were cutting something with axes near the stockade, and I later found out it was the jolly boat. Far away, by the river, I saw a big fire burning among the trees. There was also a pirate boat going back and forth between the ship and the shore. The men looked like they were having fun, and I could tell they were probably drinking rum. I thought I could go back to the stockade now. I was walking along the sandy beach, and I saw a tall white rock in the distance. I thought it might be the rock Ben Gunn had mentioned, and maybe one day we would need a boat, and I'd know where to find one. I kept walking and soon got to the back of the stockade. The men there were happy to see me. I told them everything that had happened. The stockade was made of logs, and the house inside was built from tree trunks. The floor was raised above the sand. There was a porch with a spring of water under it. The spring water flowed into an old ship's kettle, which had been turned into a basin. There wasn't much left of the old house, but there was a stone for the fireplace and a rusty old iron basket for the fire. They had cleared the trees to build the house, and I could see by the tree stumps that the forest used to be much bigger. Now, there were only a few green plants and moss near the water. The trees around the stockade were thick and tall. The evening breeze blew through the house, bringing in a lot of sand. There was sand everywhere, on the floor, in our eyes, in our food. It was like we were living in a desert. Gray, the new man, had his face covered in a bandage from a cut he got when running away from the pirates. Poor Tom Redruth was still lying in the corner, dead, covered by the Union Jack flag. Captain Smollett wouldn't let us rest. He made everyone work in shifts. The doctor, Gray, and I were on one shift, and the squire, Hunter, and Joyce were on the other. Even though we were tired, we had to keep busy. 2 men went for firewood, 2 others dug a grave for Tom, and the doctor was the cook. I was the guard at the door. The captain went around helping everyone and keeping our spirits up. Sometimes, the doctor came to the door for some fresh air and talked to me. That Captain Smollett, he said one time, is a better man than I am. And when I say that, it means a lot, Jim. Another time, he came and sat quietly for a while. Then he asked me, "Is Ben Gunn a man?" "I'm not sure," I said. "He might not be completely sane." "If he isn't sane, then he is," said the doctor. "A man who's been on a desert island for 3 years can't be normal, Jim. No one could. Did he say he wanted cheese?" "Yes," I answered. "Cheese. Well, Jim," the doctor said, "I carry a little piece of Parmesan cheese in my snuff box. That's for Ben Gunn. Before dinner, we buried old Tom in the sand and stood around his grave with the wind blowing. We had gathered some firewood, but not enough for the captain. He was unhappy and told us to work harder tomorrow. After dinner, we all had some brandy and discussed our plans. The captain said our best hope was to keep fighting the pirates. There were only 15 of them left, and 2 were hurt. We should keep attacking them and be careful not to get hurt. We had 2 advantages, rum and the climate. We could hear the pirates laughing and singing, which meant they were drinking. And the doctor said the heat and the lack of medicine would make half of them sick. We might not all survive, the doctor said, but if we don't get killed, the pirates will be happy to leave. The captain said, "This is the first ship I've lost." I was very tired. After tossing in bed for a long time, I finally fell asleep. In the morning, the others had already been up and had breakfast. They had also collected more firewood when I woke up to the sound of voices. "Flag of truce!" I heard someone shout, and then, "Silver himself!" I jumped up, rubbed my eyes, and ran to the hole in the wall to see what was happening. Chapter 20. Silver's Embassy. There were 2 men outside the stockade. One of them was holding a white cloth, and the other was Silver himself, standing calmly by. It was a very cold morning. The sky was clear, and the sun was shining on the tops of the trees, but Silver and his friend were standing in the shadow and wading through a cold mist from the marsh. The place was damp and unhealthy. "Stay inside, men," said the captain. "This could be a trick." He called out to the pirates, "Who's there? Stay where you are or we'll shoot." "Flag of truce," shouted Silver. The captain was standing in the porch, staying out of the way of any possible attack. He turned to us and gave orders. "Doctor, take the north side. Jim, you take the east. Gray the west. Everyone else, load your muskets. Be quick and careful." He turned back to Silver. "What do you want with your flag of truce?" he asked. The man with Silver spoke. "Captain Silver wants to talk and make a deal," he called. "Captain Silver? Who's that?" said the captain, and we could hear him mutter, "Captain? That's a joke." Silver answered for himself. "Me, sir. These lads have made me captain since you left us. We want to make a deal. All I ask is your word, Captain Smollett, to let me leave safely for 1 minute before the guns fire." The captain answered, "I don't want to talk to you. If you want to talk, come over here. But if you try any tricks, the Lord help you." "That's enough, Captain," shouted Silver. "A word from you is enough. I know a gentleman when I hear one." We saw the man with the flag trying to stop Silver, but Silver laughed and slapped him on the back. Then he walked to the stockade and climbed over it with his crutch. It was difficult, but he managed to get over safely. I was so interested in what was happening that I forgot my job as a sentry. I crept up behind the captain, who was sitting on the porch looking at the water. He was whistling a song. Silver struggled to climb the hill. The sand and tree stumps made it hard for him, but he didn't give up. He finally reached the captain, who greeted him politely. Silver was wearing his best clothes, a big blue coat with brass buttons and a fancy hat. "Here you are," said the captain. "You'd better sit down." "Aren't you going to let me inside, Captain?" Silver asked. "It's cold out here." "Well, Silver," the captain replied, "if you had been honest, you could have stayed in the galley. It's your own fault. You're either my cook, and you were treated well, or you're a pirate. If you're a pirate, you can go hang." Silver sat down on the sand. "Well, Cap'n," he said, "you'll have to help me get up again. It's a nice place you have here." "Ah, Jim. Top of the morning to you, Jim. Doctor, my respects. Looks like you're all here together like a happy family." "If you have something to say it," said the captain. "Well, Captain," Silver said, "you did well last night. Some of my men were shaken up, but we're not going to let that happen again. We need to do sentry duty, and we'll cut back on the rum. Maybe we weren't all sober, but if I had woken up sooner, I would have stopped you. The man wasn't dead when I saw him." The captain didn't understand everything Silver said, but he didn't show it. I had an idea what Silver was talking about, and I remembered Ben Gunn's words. I realized that the pirates were drunk when we fought them, and now there were only 14 pirates left. Silver continued, "We want the treasure, and we'll get it. You'd like to save your lives, right? You have a treasure map, don't you?" The captain replied, "That's for me to know." "Ah, I know you have it," said Silver. "No need to be so rude. What I mean is, we want the map. I never meant to harm you." The captain interrupted, "We know exactly what you want and you can't have it." Silver said, "Well, we'll make a deal. You give us the map and stop shooting our men. We'll offer you a choice. You can come aboard with us after we get the treasure, and I'll give you my word to get you safely ashore. Or if you don't want that, we'll stay here and share our supplies with you, and I'll send a ship to pick you up." The captain stood up and knocked the ashes out of his pipe. "Is that all?" he asked. "Every last word," answered Silver. "If you refuse, you'll see the last of me, except for musket balls." "Very good," said the captain. "Now listen to me. If you come one by one, unarmed, I'll put you in irons and take you to England for a fair trial. If not, I'll see you all gone. You can't find the treasure. You can't sail the ship. You can't fight us. We've beaten you before, and we'll do it again. You're trapped, Silver. Now get out of here fast." Silver's face turned red with anger. He shook the fire out of his pipe. "Help me up!" he yelled. "No!" said the captain. "Who will help me up?" Silver screamed. No one moved. Silver crawled along the sand until he reached the porch. He managed to get up and spat into the spring. "That's what I think of you," he said. "In an hour, I'll destroy your blockhouse. You'll regret this." He cursed loudly and crawled back across the stockade. His man helped him over the fence, and they disappeared into the trees. Chapter 21. The Attack. As soon as Silver left, the captain, who had been watching him, turned around and saw that no one was at their post except Gray. This was the first time we had seen him angry. "Get to your places," he shouted. Then, as we quickly returned to our spots, he said, "Gray, I'll write your name in the log. You've done your duty like a true sailor. Mr. Trelawney, I'm surprised at you, sir. Doctor, I thought you were loyal to the king. If you fought like that at Fontenoy, you should have stayed in bed." The doctor's team went back to their positions, and the rest of us were loading the muskets, each of us feeling embarrassed. The captain stayed silent for a moment, then spoke again. "My friends," he said, "I've given Silver a warning. I told him exactly what I thought, and in less than an hour, he will come to attack us. We're outnumbered, but we have shelter. We can beat them if we stand together." Then the captain checked everything to make sure we were ready. On the east and west sides of the house, there were 2 openings for shooting. On the south side, where the porch was, there were 2 more, and on the north side, there were 5. We had enough muskets for all of us. There were piles of firewood placed around the house, with ammunition and loaded muskets ready for use. In the middle, there were cutlasses. "Put out the fire," said the captain. "The chill is gone, and we don't want smoke in our eyes." Mr. Trelawney carried the fire outside, and the embers were covered with sand. "Hawkins hasn't had breakfast. Hawkins, take some food and go back to your post," the captain said. "Hurry, you'll need it." While we ate, the captain planned the defense. "Doctor, you will take the door. Stay inside and shoot through the porch. Hunter, take the east side. Joyce, you stand on the west. Mr. Trelawney, you and Gray will defend the long north side where the 5 openings are. The main danger is there. We must not let them shoot through our openings. Hawkins and I will stay ready to load the muskets." The sun soon rose, and the heat came quickly. The sand started to bake, and the trees around the house gave off the smell of resin. We all took off our jackets and rolled up our sleeves, ready for the fight. An hour passed. "This is boring," said the captain. "Gray, whistle for a wind." Just then, Joyce called out, "If I see anyone, should I shoot?" he asked. "I told you so," the captain replied. "Thank you, sir," Joyce said calmly. We were all alert, watching and listening. The muskets were ready, and the captain stood in the middle of the house, his mouth tight and a frown on his face. After a few seconds, Joyce suddenly fired. Almost immediately, shots rang out from outside in a quick, scattered volley. Bullets hit the house, but none entered. After the smoke cleared, everything looked as quiet as before. We couldn't see any of the pirates. "Did you hit anyone?" the captain asked. "No, sir," Joyce answered. "I don't think so." "Well, at least you told the truth," the captain muttered. "Load his gun, Hawkins. Doctor, how many do you think there were on your side?" "I know exactly," the doctor said. "I saw 3 flashes. 2 were close together, and 1 was farther to the west." "3," repeated the captain. "And how many on your side, Mr. Trelawney?" It was harder for Mr. Trelawney to answer. He thought there were 7, maybe 8 or 9 pirates on the north side. From the east and west, there was only 1 shot from each. So it seemed the main attack would come from the north, but the captain didn't change the plan. Suddenly, a group of pirates jumped out of the trees on the north side and rushed at the stockade. At the same time, the firing from the woods started again, and a rifle bullet hit the doctor's musket, breaking it. The pirates climbed over the fence like monkeys. Mr. Trelawney and Gray fired again, and 3 pirates fell, 2 outside and 1 inside the stockade. One of the pirates quickly got up and ran into the trees. Now 4 pirates were inside, and 7 or 8 more were firing from the woods. The 4 inside ran towards the house, shouting. The other pirates in the woods shouted back to encourage them. More shots were fired, but the pirates missed. The 4 inside the stockade reached the house and climbed up the hill. The first pirate, Job Anderson, the boatswain, appeared at the loophole. "Attack them!" he shouted. At the same time, another pirate grabbed Hunter's musket and hit him with it, knocking him out. A third pirate appeared in the doorway and attacked the doctor with a cutlass. Our position had changed. Now we were exposed, and the pirates were inside. The house was full of smoke, which helped protect us. We heard shouting, gunshots, and one loud groan. "Out, lads! Out, and fight them in the open!" shouted the captain. I grabbed a cutlass, and someone else accidentally slashed my hand as they grabbed another. I ran outside into the sunlight. I saw the doctor chasing a pirate down the hill. He hit him with his sword, sending the pirate falling onto his back. "Round the house, lads!" shouted the captain. I followed him, running to the east side of the house. As I turned the corner, I ran into Anderson. He raised his sword to strike, but I quickly moved out of the way and tripped, falling down the slope. When I got up, I saw the pirate still trying to climb the fence. One man in a red nightcap had almost made it over, but before he could get fully inside, Gray cut him down. Another pirate, still trying to shoot through a loophole, was shot by Mr. Trelawney. The doctor had taken down another with one blow. Only one pirate was left, and he was running away. The doctor shouted, "Fire from the house! Get back into cover!" But no one fired, and the last pirate disappeared into the trees. In a few seconds, all the pirates who had attacked were either dead or gone. We ran back to the house to hide, knowing the pirates might come back at any moment. The smoke had cleared, and we could see the cost of our victory. Hunter was lying unconscious by his loophole. Joyce was dead, shot through the head, and the captain and Mr. Trelawney were both pale, with the captain wounded. "The captain's hurt," Mr. Trelawney said. "Did they escape?" asked Captain Smollett. "They all ran who could," the doctor answered, "but 5 of them won't run again." "5," said the captain. "That's better. 5 against 3 leaves us 4-9. That's better odds than we had before. We were 7-19, or we thought we were, and that was much worse." Chapter 22. How I Began My Sea Adventure. There were no more attacks from the pirates. There was not even a single shot from the woods. The captain said they had got their rations for the day, so we had some peace and quiet. We used this time to check on the wounded and prepare dinner. The squire and I cooked outside, even though it was dangerous. We could hardly focus on the cooking because we kept hearing the loud groans from the doctor's patients. Out of the 8 men who had been injured, only 3 were still alive. The pirate who had been shot at the loophole, Hunter, and Captain Smollett. The pirate died under the doctor's care, and Hunter, despite our best efforts, never woke up. His chest had been crushed, and his skull fractured when he fell. He passed away quietly later that night. As for the captain, his injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. The bullet from Job Anderson had broken his shoulder and hurt his lung, but the doctor said he would recover. However, he had to stay still for weeks and avoid talking or moving too much. I had only a small cut on my hand, which the doctor patched up easily, but he also gave me a little lecture about it. After dinner, the squire and doctor spoke with the captain for a while. When they finished, it was a little past noon. The doctor took his hat and pistols, put on a cutlass, and tucked the treasure map into his pocket. He took a musket, crossed over the stockade, and walked into the trees. Gray and I were sitting at the far end of the house to stay out of their way. Gray was so surprised by the doctor's actions that he forgot to put his pipe back in his mouth. "Why is Dr. Livesey acting this way?" Gray asked. "I don't think he's mad," I replied. "He's probably going to see Ben Gunn." I was right. But while I thought about the doctor's plan, I started to feel uncomfortable in the hothouse with the sun shining through the palisade. The smell of blood and the sight of the dead bodies around us made me feel disgusted and afraid. I began to envy the doctor, walking in the cool shade of the trees. I wanted to be outside too, but I felt trapped. As I was cleaning up, I had an idea. I quietly took some biscuits from a bag and filled my pockets. No one noticed me. I wasn't thinking clearly. I knew I was doing something foolish, but I was determined to do it with care. The biscuits would at least keep me from starving if I needed them. Next, I grabbed 2 pistols and took some powder and bullets. I felt ready to go. My plan was simple. I was going to walk down the sandy path to the east, find the white rock I had seen earlier, and check if Ben Gunn had hidden his boat there. I thought it was worth investigating, but I also knew I wasn't supposed to leave the camp. So, my only choice was to sneak out when no one was looking. I got my chance when the squire and Gray were busy with the captain. The coast was clear, so I quickly climbed over the stockade and ran into the trees. I knew this was a risky move, leaving only 2 men to guard the house, but I was determined. I made my way to the east side of the island, avoiding the camp. It was still sunny and warm, but the breeze from the sea started to pick up. As I walked, I heard the sound of the surf, and soon I reached the beach. The sea was beautiful, and I walked along the shore, enjoying the cool air. I continued down the spit, moving quietly through the trees, until I reached the ridge. I was careful to stay hidden from view. The fog was starting to roll in, and the ship, the Hispaniola, looked still and silent in the distance. The Jolly Roger flag was flying from its peak. I saw Silver in the boat with some other men. They were talking and laughing, but I couldn't hear them. Then I heard a loud, strange scream, which reminded me of Captain Flint's bird. The jolly boat left the ship and headed towards the shore. I knew this was my chance to find Ben Gunn's boat. As the sun began to set, I moved quickly down the spit to reach the white rock I had seen earlier. It took a little while to get there, but I finally found it. Just below the rock, there was a small hollow hidden by bushes. And there, in the center of the hollow, was Ben Gunn's boat. It was made of wood and goatskin, small and crude, but it could float. I was about to give up on my plan, but I suddenly thought of something else. I decided I would try to slip out at night, cut the Hispaniola loose, and let it drift to shore. I thought the pirates might be ready to sail away, and this would prevent them from escaping. It was the perfect night for my plan. The fog had covered the sky, and it was completely dark. I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed the boat and headed toward the shore, determined to carry out my plan, no matter the risk. Chapter 23. The Ebb Tide Runs. The Coracle was a very safe boat for someone like me, but it was very difficult to control. No matter what I did, it always turned in circles and went the wrong way. Ben Gunn himself said it was hard to handle until you learned how to control it. I certainly didn't know how to handle it. I often found myself going sideways, and I don't think I would have reached the ship if it wasn't for the tide. Luckily, the tide was pulling me toward the Hispaniola, and I could see the ship getting closer. At first, the ship looked like a dark shape in the distance, but then I could make out the details of its hull and masts. The tide was carrying me faster, and soon I was right next to the ship. I grabbed the rope tied to the ship. The rope was very tight, and the current was so strong that it was pulling the ship. The water around the ship bubbled and splashed like a fast-moving stream. I knew that if I cut the rope, the ship would float away. But then I realized that cutting the rope could be dangerous. If I did that, I could be knocked out of the coracle by the force of the ship pulling away. I decided to wait for the right moment. Fortunately, the wind changed direction and began to blow the ship toward the current. I felt the rope loosen, and I quickly cut some strands. When the wind blew again, I cut the rest of the rope. While I was waiting, I heard loud voices from the ship. I realized that 2 pirates, Israel Hands and the man in the red nightcap, were arguing. They were clearly drunk, and I could hear them shouting at each other. Every now and then, One of them would throw something out of the window, and I guessed it was an empty bottle. Their argument went on for a long time, but it seemed like they were getting more angry. On the shore, I could see the glow of the campfire, and I heard a sailor's song. It seemed a little too sad for the pirates, given the terrible losses they had suffered that morning. But they didn't seem to care much about their situation. Eventually the breeze came, and the ship began to move. The rope loosened completely, and I quickly cut the last bits. The coracle didn't move quickly, but it was enough for me to be swept up next to the ship. The ship started turning slowly, and I tried my best to steer the coracle away from the ship. I couldn't get far, but I was clear of the ship's side. Just then, I noticed a rope trailing behind the ship. I grabbed it, not knowing why, but my curiosity made me want to see what was happening on the ship. I pulled myself up and looked into the cabin. Through the window, I saw Israel Hands and the man in the red nightcap wrestling with each other. They were both furious, and it looked like they were trying to strangle each other. I quickly lay back down in the coracle before I could be seen. The song from the campfire had ended, and the pirates began to sing their usual chorus. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. I was thinking about how busy the pirates were drinking and fighting when suddenly the coracle moved. I opened my eyes and saw the water around me was moving faster, and I could feel the current pulling me. The ship had changed course, and it seemed like the current was carrying us both toward the open sea. I was terrified. I lay flat in the coracle, praying as I felt the waves crashing around me. I expected the coracle to capsize at any moment, but I held on. The waves tossed me around for what seemed like hours, and eventually I grew tired. I fell into a light sleep, dreaming of home and the old Admiral Benbow Inn. Chapter 24. The Cruise of the Coracle. I woke up in the morning to find myself drifting near the southwest end of Treasure Island. The sun was up, but it was still hidden behind a big hill called the Spyglass, which was steep and tall. I was very close to two places, Haulbowline Head and Mizzenmast Hill. The hill was dark, and the head had high cliffs with big rocks scattered around. I was only a short distance from the shore, so I first thought I could paddle to land. But soon I realized it was too dangerous. The waves crashed against the rocks, making loud noises and spraying water everywhere. I saw big sea lions on the rocks, moving like giant snails, making barking sounds. They scared me, and I decided it would be better to stay at sea than risk going near the shore. I then noticed a better place to land further north, past Haulbowline Head. There, I could see a long stretch of sand that would be safer to approach. I decided to wait for the current to help me reach it. The sea was calm with a gentle wind, and the little boat I was in moved smoothly through the water. The coracle, although small, was very light and easy to move. I stayed lying flat at the bottom, but occasionally I could see big waves coming. The coracle would bounce over the waves and gently settle again. After a while, I became a little braver and tried to paddle. But as soon as I moved, the coracle suddenly turned and rushed down a wave. I got splashed and scared, so I quickly lay back down. The boat returned to its calm path, and I decided to leave it to do its own thing. I was starting to get very nervous, but I kept my head cool. I used my hat to bail out some water, and then I watched carefully how the boat moved. I realized that the waves were like hills, with peaks and valleys. The coracle avoided the tall parts, and slid through the lower spots easily. I thought to myself, I just have to stay still and paddle a little now and then to steer the boat. It was slow work, but little by little I was getting closer to the Cape of the Woods, which looked much friendlier. As I neared the land, I began to feel very thirsty. The heat from the sun and the salty seawater made my throat burn. I could see the green trees ahead, and it made me want to reach them quickly. But the current carried me past the cape, and I thought I would never make it. Just then I saw the Hispaniola. The ship was sailing not far from me, and I was sure they would see me and rescue me. But I was so thirsty, I couldn't decide if I should be happy or sad. The ship's sails were white and shining in the sun. She was heading north, but then she turned and seemed to move in circles. The ship's movements were strange, and I thought the men on board were still drunk. I noticed that no one seemed to be steering the ship. The sails were flapping, and the ship was spinning around in the water. I realized that the ship might be deserted, and if I could get on board, I might be able to take control and return the ship to the captain. The current was pulling both the coracle and the ship in the same direction. The ship was moving strangely, but I thought if I paddled hard enough, I could catch up. I knew there was fresh water on the ship, and that gave me more courage. I paddled hard and made progress, though it was difficult. Sometimes a wave hit the coracle, and I had to stop and bail out water. But soon, I was very close to the ship. I could see the brass on the tiller, and still, no one was on deck. I thought the ship was deserted. The ship had been drifting aimlessly for some time, and I had been gaining on it. The sails were flapping, and I could hear the ropes creaking as they swung in the wind. Then, suddenly, the wind picked up again, and the ship started moving away from me. I felt desperate at first, but then I saw my chance. The ship turned towards me again, and I knew I was getting closer. I could see the ship's bow over me as it moved closer, and I was almost there. Suddenly, the ship made another sharp turn, and I jumped up to grab hold of the jib boom. I clung to it, and the coracle was struck by the ship. There was no way to escape now, and I found myself on board the Hispaniola. Chapter 25. I Strike the Jolly Roger. I had just reached the front part of the ship when the sail suddenly moved and made a loud noise like a gun. The ship shook, but the sail quickly moved back and stopped. This almost threw me into the sea, but I quickly crawled back and fell onto the deck. I was on the side of the ship, and the big sail was in the way, so I couldn't see much of the back deck. There was no one around. The floor was dirty with many footprints, and a broken bottle rolled back and forth in the water. Suddenly, the ship turned into the wind. The sails made loud noises, and the ship shook. The big pole moved, and I could now see the back deck. There were 2 men there. One man was lying stiff on his back with his arms out and his teeth showing. The other man, Israel Hands, was sitting against the side of the ship. His face was very pale, and he looked very weak. The ship kept moving roughly, like a wild horse. At each bump, the man with the red cap didn't move. His face stayed the same, with his teeth showing. Israel Hands seemed to sink lower and lower as the ship moved. His face was slowly hidden from me, and all I could see was his ear. I saw some blood around both men and thought they might have hurt each other. Then, in a quiet moment, Israel Hands moved and moaned in pain. He turned back into his old position. His moan made me feel sorry for him, but I remembered hearing bad things about him before, so I didn't feel sorry anymore. I walked to the back of the ship. "Come aboard, Mr. Hands," I said. He looked at me, but he was too weak to be surprised. All he said was, "Brandy." I went to the cabin to get some brandy for him and food for myself. The cabin was a mess. Things were broken, and there were empty bottles everywhere. The floor was dirty, and it smelled of alcohol. I found some brandy, biscuits, fruits, raisins, and cheese. I went back on deck, put my food out of the coxswain's reach, and drank some water. Then I gave the brandy to Israel Hands. He drank it quickly. He said, "I needed that." I sat down and started eating. "Much hurt?" I asked. He made a noise like a bark. "If the doctor was here," he said, "I'd be fine. But I have no luck. That red-cap man is dead anyway." I said, "I came to take control of this ship, Mr. Hands. From now on, I'm the captain." He looked at me but didn't say anything. He still looked sick, but he had a little more color in his face. "I can't keep this flag," I said. "I'm going to take it down." I went to the flag, took it down, and threw it overboard. "God save the king!" I shouted, waving my hat. "That's the end of Captain Silver." Israel Hands looked at me, but he only said, "I think, Captain Hawkins, you might want to go ashore now. Let's talk." "Sure," I said. "Let's talk." He told me that he and the man with the red cap had planned to sail the ship back. But now the man was dead, and Israel said he couldn't sail it alone. He asked me for food, drink, and a cloth for his wound in exchange for teaching me how to sail. "I'm not going back to Captain Kidd's place," I said. "I plan to beach the ship at North Inlet." "That's a good plan," Israel agreed. "I'll help you sail it there." We made a deal, and in a few minutes the ship was sailing easily with the wind. The island passed by, and we were soon on the other side, near the northern end of the island. I was happy with my new command. The weather was good, and I had enough food and water. My conscience felt better after what I had done, even though I still noticed the coxswain watching me with a strange smile. It was a smile of weakness, pain, and something I couldn't trust. Chapter 26. Israel Hands. The wind was just right for us, and we were able to sail more easily from the northeast corner of the island to North Inlet. However, we couldn't stop the ship and had to wait until the tide came in a bit more before we could beach it. While waiting, the coxswain taught me how to control the ship. After a few tries, I did it well, and we sat quietly to eat. "Captain," said the coxswain after a while, with a strange smile, "what do you think about throwing O'Brien overboard? He doesn't look nice now, does he?" "I'm not strong enough, and I don't want to do it. He's there for now," I said. "This ship, the Hispaniola, is unlucky, Jim," he said. "So many men have died since we left Bristol. There's O'Brien. He's dead, right? But tell me, Jim, do you think a dead man stays dead, or do they come back?" "You can kill the body, Mr. Hands, but not the spirit," I said. "O'Brien is in another world now, maybe watching us." "Ah," he said. "Well, that's a shame. Looks like killing people is a waste. But spirits don't matter much from what I've seen. I'll take my chances with them. And now, Jim, you've been honest with me. Please, go to the cabin and bring me a bottle of wine. This brandy is too strong for me." I didn't trust him, though. I thought he didn't really want wine. He was trying to get me off the deck for some reason, but I didn't know why. His eyes kept moving nervously, looking at the sky, at the dead man, and avoiding my gaze. I quickly thought of a plan. Some wine? Much better. Would you like red or white? I said. It doesn't matter, he replied. As long as it's strong and there's plenty of it. Okay, I'll bring you port wine, I said, but I'll have to find it. I quickly ran down to the cabin, took off my shoes, and quietly climbed up to the front of the ship. I knew he wouldn't expect me there, but I was careful. What I suspected turned out to be true. He had gotten up and was crawling across the deck, even though his leg hurt him. I heard him groan. He reached a coil of rope and pulled out a bloody knife. He looked at it, tried it on his hand, and then hid it in his jacket before crawling back to his spot. I now knew that he was planning something. He was armed, and it seemed like he wanted to kill me. However, we both wanted the ship to be safe on the shore, so I believed my life would be safe until we got there. I quickly went back to the cabin, put on my shoes, grabbed the wine, and returned to the deck. Israel was still lying down, but he looked up when I arrived. He grabbed the bottle and drank it quickly. "Here's luck," he said, and then asked me to cut him some tobacco. "I'll cut it for you," I said. "But if I were you, I would pray, like a good person." "Why?" he asked. "Because you've lived in lies, blood, and sin," I said. "You killed a man, and now he lies at your feet. For God's mercy, Mr. Hands, that's why." He drank more wine, and then spoke seriously. "I've sailed the seas for 30 years, he said. "I've seen all kinds of things, but I've never seen good come from goodness. The man who strikes first wins. Dead men don't bite. Those are my thoughts. Amen." Then he suddenly changed his tone. "The tide is right now," he said. "Let's go to shore." We had only 2 miles to go, but the entrance to the shore was narrow and tricky. We both worked well together, and we sailed the ship carefully. When we finally reached the shore, the land closed around us, and we saw an old, broken ship with flowers growing on it. It was a sad sight, but it showed the place was calm. "There," said Hans. "That's a good place to beach the ship. Nice flat sand, no wind, trees and flowers." "And once we're beached," I asked, "how do we get the ship back out?" "Well," he said, "you tie a rope to a big tree, pull it, and when the tide comes in, everyone pulls on the rope, and the ship will come out." We were close to the shore now, and Hans gave me directions to guide the ship. Just before we reached the shore, I turned the wheel, and the ship went toward the sand. I was so focused on the ship that I didn't notice Hans moving toward me. When I turned, I saw him with the knife in his hand. We both shouted when our eyes met. He jumped at me, and I jumped to the side. I let go of the wheel, and the ship turned sharply, hitting him in the chest and stopping him for a moment. I quickly ran to the front of the ship, took out a pistol, and aimed at him. But when I pulled the trigger, nothing happened. The gunpowder was wet. I cursed myself for not being ready. I knew my other pistol wouldn't work either. Israel, though hurt, was still fast and angry. He came after me, and I couldn't run away for long or he would trap me. I had to think quickly. I pushed myself up the ship's rigging, and Israel followed slowly, struggling with his injured leg. When I reached the top, I turned to face him with a pistol in each hand. "One more step, Mr. Hands," I said, "and I'll shoot." He stopped. He looked confused, trying to think. I laughed, feeling safe for the moment. Then suddenly, he threw something, and I felt a sharp pain in my shoulder. I didn't mean to do it, but in the confusion, I fired both pistols. The coxswain fell into the water, and I was left standing alone on the rigging, safe for now. Chapter 27. Pieces of 8. Because the ship was tilted, the masts were hanging far over the water. From where I was sitting high up on the ship, all I could see below me was the sea. Israel Hands, who wasn't as high up, fell between me and the side of the ship. He came to the surface once, covered in foam and blood, then sank and didn't come back up. After a while, the water settled, and I could see him lying on the sand next to the ship. Fish swam past him, and I thought I saw him move a little, but he was really dead, both shot and drowned. The fish were starting to eat him in the same place he had planned to kill me. When I realized he was dead, I felt dizzy and scared. The pain from the knife wound in my shoulder was bad, and the blood was still running down my chest. But what scared me most was the idea of falling into the water next to his body. I held on to the ship tight, closing my eyes to try to ignore the fear. Slowly, I calmed down, and my heart beat more normally again. My first thought was to pull the knife out, but it hurt too much, and I couldn't do it. I stopped for a moment, and then a shiver ran through my body, and the knife came loose. It had only cut a small part of my skin. The blood kept flowing, but I was free. I quickly took off my shirt and coat and climbed back down to the deck, feeling safer on solid ground. I went below deck to take care of my wound. It hurt, but it wasn't too deep, and I could still use my arm. After I cleaned it, I thought about the dead man, O'Brien, who was still on the ship. Since the ship was now mine, I decided to throw him overboard too. O'Brien's body was lying against the side of the ship. He looked strange, like a lifeless puppet. I didn't feel scared of him anymore. I grabbed him by the waist and tossed him into the water. He splashed into the sea, and his red cap floated on the surface. I could see him and Israel lying together in the water. Now I was alone on the ship. The tide was changing, and the sun was almost setting. The breeze was light, and the ropes on the ship made a soft noise as they moved. I realized that the ship was in danger. The sails were still up, and the mainsail was hanging in the water. I tried to pull it in, but the strain was too much, so I cut the ropes. The sail dropped into the water, and the ship was left to the wind. The day was getting colder, and the ship was sinking more and more. I climbed over the side of the ship, holding onto the rope for safety, and dropped into the water. It was shallow, and the sand was firm. I walked to the shore, leaving the ship behind. The water was calm, and the evening air felt nice. The sun set as I made my way to land. I was happy to be off the ship, and I felt proud of myself. The ship was now free of the pirates, and I had a good story to tell when I got back to my friends. I started walking towards the camp, excited to see them again. I knew there was a river nearby, so I headed in that direction. Soon, I crossed the river and continued walking. As it got dark, I became more careful. I was close to where I had met Ben Gunn, and I remembered to watch out for anything unusual. I soon saw a light in the distance, and I thought it was strange that Ben Gunn was so careless, letting his fire be seen. I wondered if Silver might see it too. The night became darker, and it was hard to see. But soon the moon rose, and its light helped me find my way. I was getting closer to the camp, but I was careful not to make noise. I didn't want my friends to mistake me for an enemy. Finally, I reached the camp and saw the blockhouse in front of me. The moonlight was shining on one side of the house, but the other side was dark. There was a big fire burning nearby, and the red glow looked strange. It wasn't like the small fires we usually made. I sneaked around the back of the house and crawled quietly to the door. When I got inside, I heard my friends snoring. It was a good sound, and I was relieved to know they were safe. But I also realized that they hadn't been keeping a good watch. If Silver had come, they wouldn't have been ready. I moved carefully to my spot and started to lie down, thinking about how surprised they would be when they saw me. But just as I did, I stepped on something soft. Someone groaned in their sleep. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice in the dark. "Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8! Pieces of 8!" It was Silver's parrot. She was repeating the same thing over and over, announcing my arrival. Before I could react, the men woke up and Silver shouted, "Who goes there?" I turned to run, but I bumped into someone and was caught by another man. Silver called for a torch, and soon one of the men returned with a lighted stick. Chapter 28. In the enemy's camp. The light from the torch showed me that the pirates were in control of the house and its supplies. There was the cask of brandy, the pork and bread, and no sign of any prisoners. I thought that they were all dead, and I felt very bad for not being there to die with them. There were 6 pirates in the room. 5 of them were standing up, still drunk from their sleep. The 6th man was lying on the floor, pale and covered in a bandage. I remembered that this man had been shot in the big fight, and I guessed that this was him. The parrot was sitting on Long John Silver's shoulder. Silver looked a little pale and serious. His clothes were torn and dirty from the forest, but he still had the fine clothes on from when he first came on board. "So," said Silver, "here's Jim Hawkins. Well, come on in, Jim. I take it friendly." He sat down across from the brandy cask and began to smoke a pipe. "Give me the torch, Dick," said Silver. Then he added, "Now, Jim, you're here. I thought you were smart when I first saw you, but you've really surprised me now." I didn't answer. They made me stand with my back against the wall, and I tried to look brave, but inside I felt hopeless. Silver smoked his pipe and kept talking. "Now, Jim, since you're here, I'll tell you what I think. I've always liked you. You've got spirit. You remind me of myself when I was young. I always wanted you to join us, take your share, and live like a gentleman. Now you've got to. Captain Smollett is a fine seaman, but he's strict. He talks about duty all the time, so just stay away from him. The doctor's dead, and he called you an ungrateful scamp. The bottom line is, you can't go back to your friends because they won't want you. So, you'll have to join us, Captain Silver's crew." I was glad to hear that my friends were still alive, but I didn't like what Silver said about them being angry with me. However, I felt a little better. "I won't say you're in our hands, but you are," said Silver. "You can join us if you want. If not, you're free to go. But if you stay, you're welcome, and I'll respect you." "Am I supposed to answer now?" I asked, feeling scared. I could hear the threat of death in his words, and my heart was beating fast. "No one is forcing you," said Silver. "Take your time. We're not in a hurry. We enjoy your company." "Well," I said, starting to feel a little braver, "I want to know what's going on. Why are you here, and where are my friends?" "What's going on?" one of the pirates growled. "Who would know that?" Silver snapped back at him. "Don't talk unless I ask you." Then Silver turned back to me and said, "Yesterday the doctor came to me with a flag of truce. He told me the ship was gone. We had been drinking and we didn't notice. We looked out and the ship was gone. We were fools. The doctor and I made a deal, and here we are with all the food, brandy, and everything we need. The rest of them are gone. I don't know where." Silver took another puff of his pipe. "And if you're thinking that you're part of the deal, here's what the doctor said." "How many are leaving?" I asked. "4, he said. 4, and one of them is wounded. As for the boy, I don't know where he is, and I don't care." Those were his words. "Is that all?" I asked. "Well, that's all you need to know," said Silver. "And now I get to choose?" I asked. "Yes, now you choose," said Silver. "Well," I said, feeling more confident, "I know what's happening. The ship is gone, the treasure is lost, and you're in trouble. If you want to know who did it, it was me. I overheard everything you said when we first saw land, and I know what you were planning. I cut the schooner's cable, and I made sure you wouldn't see her again. You can kill me if you want, but I don't fear you. But if you spare me, I'll help you. I'll save you from being hanged when they catch you." I stopped to catch my breath. To my surprise, no one moved. They just stared at me, and while they were staring, I spoke again. "And now, Mr. Silver, I think you're the best man here. If things go badly, please let the doctor know how I tried to help." "I'll remember that," said Silver. He didn't laugh, but his voice sounded strange, and I wasn't sure if he was mocking me or respecting me. One of the pirates, Morgan, spoke up. It was him who knew Black Dog. Silver replied, "And it was him who got the map from Billy Bones. We've all betrayed Jim Hawkins." "Then it's decided," said Morgan, jumping up with a knife in his hand. Silver stopped him. "What do you think you're doing, Morgan? You think you're the captain now? No man crosses me like that, or you'll be feeding the fishes." Morgan hesitated, and the others murmured, "Tom's right. I'm not going to be bullied by Silver." Silver shouted at them, "Who else wants to fight me? I'm the captain here. I'm the best man, and you'll follow me, or you'll regret it." No one moved or said anything. Silver looked at them with his pipe in his mouth, calm as ever. I stood there, heart still racing, but now feeling a little better. "You don't want to fight?" Silver said. "Then you'll follow my orders. I like this boy. He's more of a man than any of you." The room was quiet for a long time. Then Silver spoke in a quiet voice to me. "You're in trouble, Jim, but I'll stand by you. If you help me, I'll help you." I was starting to understand. "You mean it's all over?" I asked. "Yes," said Silver. "The ship is gone. Everything is lost. But I'll save your life, Jim, if you save mine." I nodded. "I'll do what I can," I said. "It's a deal," Silver said, smiling. Chapter 29. The Black Spot. Again. The meeting of the pirates had been going on for a while when one of them came back into the house. He asked for the torch, and Silver gave it to him without much comment. The pirate left again, and we were left in the dark. "There's a breeze coming, Jim," said Silver in a friendly tone. I looked out the window. The fire outside was almost out, but I could still see a group of pirates gathered near the stockade. One of them was holding a knife, and I could see the shine of the blade in the light. He was also holding a book, and I wondered how they had gotten a Bible. The group moved towards the house, and I quickly turned away, not wanting them to see me watching them. "Well, let them come," said Silver. "I've still got a shot left." The door opened, and 5 pirates entered. They pushed one of their group forward. It was a little funny to see him moving slowly with his right hand out in front of him. "Step up, lad," said Silver. "I won't hurt you. Hand it over." The pirate stepped forward, gave something to Silver, and then quickly went back to the others. Silver looked at the object. "The black spot. I thought so," he said. "Where did you get this paper from? What fool used a Bible to make it?" "That's no good," said Morgan. "I told you something bad would come of it." "Well, you've really done it now," said Silver. "You're all going to swing for this. Who had the Bible?" "It was Dick," said one pirate. "Dick, was it?" said Silver. "Well, he can go pray now. He's had his luck." But then the tall pirate with yellow eyes spoke up. "Stop that talk, Silver," he said. "This crew gave you the black spot, and now you need to turn it over and see what it says. Then we can talk." Silver took the paper and looked at it. "Ah, deposed," he said. "Very nice handwriting, George. Looks like you'll be the next captain." He asked for the torch again and lit his pipe. George wasn't happy. "You don't fool us any more, Silver," he said. "You're over now. You'll have to step down and let us vote." Silver laughed. "I know the rules, George. I'll wait here and listen to your complaints. I'm still the captain. After that, we'll see." George started talking about how bad Silver had been. "You ruined this trip. You let the enemy go. You wouldn't let us attack them. And then there's this boy," George said. "Is that all?" asked Silver calmly. "Enough," George shouted. "We'll all be hanged because of you." "Well, let me answer each of those points," said Silver. "First, I wanted to be on the ship, and if you hadn't crossed me, we'd all be alive and well on the Hispaniola right now, with the treasure. But who stopped me? It was Anderson, Hans, and you, George. You're the ones who started this mess. And as for the boy, you want to kill him? No way. He might be our last chance. As for number 3, maybe you don't know, but I've got a doctor here, and he can help us." Silver went on explaining his side. The pirates listened, and their faces showed they were starting to believe him. "Now, let me show you something," Silver said. He threw down a piece of paper. I immediately recognized it as the map from the captain's chest. The pirates looked at it, and they got excited. They passed the map around, staring at it like it was gold. "Yes, this is Flint's map," said one pirate. "We know this is the treasure." "But how are we going to get it without a ship?" said George. Silver got angry. "If you say another word like that, I'll fight you," he shouted. "You lost me the ship, but you can speak respectfully." The pirates seemed to understand and kept quiet. "Now," said Silver, "you've lost the ship, but I found the treasure. Who's better at that? So now I resign. Elect a new captain if you want." "Silver forever! Silver for captain!" the pirates shouted. "All right," said Silver. "You can have another turn, but I'm not a vengeful man." Then Silver took out a small piece of paper and handed it to me. It was a small square, and on it was a verse from the Bible. The paper was blackened with ashes. It said "deposed," and it was a reminder of the black spot that had been given to Silver. "That's it for tonight," said Silver. "Now let's have a drink and sleep. We have to be careful." I couldn't sleep right away. I kept thinking about the things I had seen, especially Silver, who was trying hard to stay alive and keep the pirates together. Silver slept peacefully, but I couldn't stop thinking about the dangers around us. Chapter 30. Parole. I woke up with a start. Actually, we were all woken up because I saw even the guard shake himself awake, leaning against the doorpost. A clear, loud voice came from outside the wood. "Blockhouse, ahoy, here's the doctor." It was the doctor. I was glad to hear him, but also felt guilty because I remembered how I had sneaked around and betrayed my friends. Now I was with pirates, and I felt ashamed to face him. The doctor must have gotten up early because the sun hadn't fully come up yet. I ran to the window and looked out. I saw the doctor standing, like Silver had before, in the fog up to his knees. "You, doctor! Good morning, sir!" shouted Silver, sounding happy. "Up early as always. It's the early bird that gets the food. George, help Dr. Livesey over the side of the ship. Everything's good. All your patients are doing well." Silver kept talking, acting like his old self, standing on the hill with his crutch under his arm, smiling and chatting like nothing was wrong. "We have a surprise for you too, sir," he continued. "We have a new guest here. He's been sleeping well, right next to me, all night." Dr. Livesey was almost at the cook's side now, and I could hear the change in his voice when he said, "Not Jim?" "The same Jim as ever," Silver replied. The doctor stopped, not saying anything, and it took him a few seconds to start walking again. "Well," he said at last, "duty first, pleasure later, as you might say, Silver. Let's take a look at your patients." He walked into the house and nodded at me without saying anything, then went straight to work with the sick pirates. Even though his life was in danger, he acted calm and professional, as though he were just visiting a normal family in England. The pirates acted like nothing was wrong, as if he was still the ship's doctor and they were still his crew. "You're doing well," the doctor said to one pirate with a bandaged head. "Your head must be as hard as iron. George, how are you? Your liver is upside down. Did you take the medicine?" Aye, sir," answered Morgan. "Well," said the doctor with a smile, "since I'm the doctor for these mutineers, I make it a point not to lose any man for King George and the gallows." The pirates looked at each other, but said nothing. "Dick doesn't feel well, sir," said one pirate. "Doesn't he?" replied the doctor. "Come here, Dick. Let me see your tongue. No wonder. You have a fever." Morgan added, "That comes from messing with Bibles." "That comes from being fools and not knowing good air from poison," the doctor said. "You camped in a swamp, and now you have malaria? Silver, I'm surprised at you. You're smarter than most, but you don't know the first thing about staying healthy." After giving them all some medicine, the doctor said, "That's done. Now I'd like to speak to that boy." At first, George Merry, who was by the door, swore and refused. Silver slammed his hand on a barrel. "Silence!" he shouted, looking at them like a lion. "Doctor, I've been thinking about that. I know you care for the boy. We trust you, and you can speak to him. Hawkins, will you promise as a young gentleman not to run away?" I quickly agreed to give my word. "Then, doctor," said Silver, "you go outside, and once you're out, I'll bring the boy to you, and you can talk." When the doctor left the house, the pirates immediately started to complain. They said Silver was trying to save himself and betray them. I didn't know how Silver could calm them down, but he was very clever, and he managed to get them to stop talking. "Slow down, lad," Silver said to me. "We don't want them to see us hurry." We walked slowly to where the doctor was waiting outside. When we got close enough, Silver stopped. "Doctor, you should remember this," he said. "I saved the boy's life, and I was deposed for it. You can ask him. When a man is in my position, you should give him a kind word. It's not just my life, it's the boy's too. Please speak kindly to me." The doctor asked, "John, are you afraid?" Silver's voice was shaky as he replied, "I'm no coward, but I'm scared of the gallows. You're a good man, Doctor. I've done bad things, but I hope you don't forget the good I've done. I'll leave you two alone now." He stepped back, sat on a tree stump, and began to whistle, keeping an eye on me, the doctor, and the other pirates who were busy with breakfast. The doctor looked at me sadly. "Here you are, Jim. I can't blame you, but I will say this. When Captain Smollett was well, you wouldn't have left. When he was sick, though, it was cowardly." I began to cry. "Doctor, I've blamed myself enough. I'm ready to die, but I'm scared of torture. If they torture me, I might say where the ship is." "The ship?" the doctor asked quickly. I told him about how I found the ship in North Inlet. It was on the southern beach, below high water, and at half tide it would be high and dry. The doctor listened carefully. "This is fate," he said. "You've saved our lives. Do you think we'll let you die now? We won't let you lose yours. You found the plot, and you found Ben Gunn. That was the best thing you've done. You've saved us all." He then turned to Silver. "I'll give you some advice. Don't hurry to find the treasure." Silver answered, "I'm only trying to save myself and the boy. You may lay to that." "Well," said the doctor, "look out for trouble when you find it." Silver replied, "If I'm to live, I have to find the treasure. I can't help it." The doctor nodded. "If we both survive, I'll do my best to help you, but I can't promise anything." Silver's face lit up. "You couldn't say more, sir. Thank you." The doctor shook my hand, nodded to Silver, and left, walking quickly into the forest. Chapter 31. The Treasure Hunt. Flint's Pointer. "Jim," said Silver when we were alone, "if I saved your life, you saved mine. I won't forget it. I saw the doctor waving to you to run. I saw it with my eye, and I saw you say no, as clear as day. Jim, that's one to you. This is the first bit of hope I've had since the attack failed, and I owe it to you. And now, Jim, we are going to search for treasure with secret orders, and I don't like it. You and I need to stick close together, like two sides of a coin, and we'll be safe, no matter what happens." Just then, someone called from the fire that breakfast was ready. We sat down around the fire, eating biscuits and fried food. They had made a big fire, hot enough to cook a big animal, and it was so hot that they could only get close to it from the side where the wind was blowing. They had cooked too much food, and one of them laughed and threw the leftover food into the fire, which blazed even higher. I had never seen men so careless about the future. They didn't worry about saving anything for later. They just ate and threw away what they didn't need. Even though they were brave in a fight, I could see they weren't ready for a long journey. Silver, eating his food with Captain Flint on his shoulder, didn't say anything about their carelessness. I was surprised by this because I thought Silver was smarter than that. "Yes, mates," said Silver. "It's good you have barbecue to think for you. I got what I wanted. They have the ship, but I don't know where. Once we find the treasure, we'll have to move fast and figure it out. Then, us who have the boats will be in control." Silver kept talking, with his mouth full of food, and this helped the men feel hopeful. I think it also made Silver feel better. "As for the hostage," he said, "this is the last talk with those he loves. I have my news from him, and I thank him for it. But it's over now. When we go treasure hunting, I'll take him with us, like gold, in case something happens. And when we have the ship and the treasure and we're on the sea, we'll talk about Mr. Hawkins and give him his share for all his help." The men were in a good mood now, but I was worried. If Silver's plan worked, he would be a traitor to us. He would rather have money and freedom with the pirates than just escape from being hanged. Even if he kept his word with Dr. Livesey, there would still be danger. I would have to fight for my life against 5 strong pirates. I was also worried because my friends had left the stockade and given up the map. I didn't understand why they did that. And the doctor had warned Silver about squalls. I was uneasy as I ate breakfast and followed my captors on the treasure hunt. We all looked strange. We were all wearing old sailor clothes, and the pirates, except for me, were armed with guns and knives. Silver had 2 guns, a big knife, and a pistol in each coat pocket. Captain Flint was sitting on his shoulder, talking nonsense. I had a rope tied around my waist, and I followed Silver, who held the other end of the rope in his hand or teeth, leading me like a bear on a leash. The other men carried tools like picks and shovels, and some carried food and brandy. I saw that all the supplies came from our stock. Silver's words were true. If he and his men hadn't made a deal with the doctor, they would have had to live on water and whatever they could hunt. We set out with everything we needed, even the man with the injured head, who should have stayed in the shade. We walked to the beach where the 2 small boats waited for us. The boats were in bad shape, one with a broken seat, and both were dirty and had water in them. But we had to take them for safety, so we split into the 2 boats and started rowing. As we rowed, we talked about the map. The Red Cross was too big to be useful, and the note on the back was unclear. The note said, "Tall tree, spyglass shoulder, bearing a point to the N of NNE, Skeleton Island ESE, and by E 10 feet. The tall tree was the most important mark, but we had no idea which tree it was. We could see a hill ahead of us with trees growing on it. Some were taller than the others, but we would have to use a compass to figure out which one was the right tree. Even though we didn't know which tree it was, each man picked his own favorite tree. Silver just shrugged and told them to wait until we got there. We rowed slowly to save energy, and after a long time, we landed at the mouth of a second river. From there, we started climbing the hill. At first, the ground was soft and wet, and the plants made it hard to walk. But soon, the hill became steeper, and the ground turned to stones. The trees became more spread out, and the air felt fresh and nice. We spread out to search, and Silver and I walked slowly behind. I had to help Silver sometimes, or he would have fallen down the hill. We had walked about half a mile when someone yelled in fear. The others ran to see what had happened. "He didn't find the treasure," said old Morgan. "It's up on top." But when we reached the spot, we found something very different. At the foot of a big pine tree, a human skeleton was lying on the ground, covered in green vines. For a moment, we all felt scared. "He was a sailor," said George Merry, who was braver than the rest, and went closer to look at the clothes. "Yes," said Silver. "It looks like a sailor. But why are the bones lying like this? It's not natural." We looked again, and it seemed strange that the body was lying so perfectly straight, with the feet pointing one way and the hands pointing the other way. "I have an idea," said Silver. "Look at the compass. The skeleton is pointing straight toward the island. Let's check the direction." We checked, and the compass read exactly where the island was. "I knew it," said Silver. "This is a sign. Flint did this. He killed these men, and then he set the skeleton here to point the way to the treasure." The men started talking about Flint. They all agreed he had died badly, and his spirit might still be around. Silver told them to stop talking and focus on finding the treasure. We all started moving again, But now the pirates were walking together, quietly, not shouting anymore. They were scared of the dead pirate's spirit. Chapter 32. The Treasure Hunt, the Voice Among the Trees. Because of the fear they felt, and to give Silver and the sick men a break, the group sat down as soon as they reached the top of the hill. The hill sloped down towards the west, so we could see a wide view from where we stopped. In front of us, over the trees, we could see the coast with waves hitting it. Behind us, we could see not only the place where the ships had been, but also a big part of the open sea to the east. The Spyglass Hill stood high above us, with trees in some places and steep cliffs in others. The only sounds were the waves far away and the many insects in the bushes. There were no ships or people in sight, and the quiet made everything feel very lonely. Silver sat down and looked at his compass. "There are 3 tall trees in a line from Skeleton Island," he said. "The Spyglass Shoulder is that point over there. Finding the treasure will be easy now. I'm thinking of resting first." "I don't feel well," said Morgan. "Thinking about Flint, I think it made me feel bad." "Well, you should thank your stars that he's dead," said Silver. "He was a scary man," said another pirate with a shiver. "His face was blue." "That's because of the rum," said Mary. "Blue? Yes, he was blue. That's the truth." Ever since they found the skeleton, the pirates had been talking quietly. Now they were almost whispering, and the quietness of the forest made their voices almost disappear. Suddenly, from the trees in front of us, a thin, high voice started singing a familiar song. 15 men on the dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. The pirates looked scared. The color drained from their faces. Some stood up quickly, some grabbed each other, and Morgan fell to the ground. "It's Flint for sure!" cried Mary. The singing stopped as quickly as it had started, like someone had put a hand over the singer's mouth. It sounded sweet and clear through the trees, but the effect it had on the pirates was strange. "Come on," said Silver, trying to speak even though he was scared. "We can't stay here. Someone is playing tricks, someone alive, not a ghost." His courage came back, and his face got a little color. The others started listening to him and seemed to calm down when suddenly the voice came again. This time, it wasn't singing, but calling out, "Darby McGraw!" The voice cried, "Darby McGraw! Darby McGraw!" And then it called louder, "Fetch the rum, Darby!" The pirates stood still, their eyes wide open. They stared ahead, not saying anything, even after the voice had stopped. "Those were Flint's last words," said Morgan in a low voice. "His last words before he died." Dick took out his Bible and started praying loudly. He had been raised well before joining the pirates, but Silver wasn't beaten. I could hear his teeth chattering, but he wasn't giving up. "Nobody on this island has heard of Darby," he muttered. "Only us who are here." Then he said with more strength, "I'm here to find the treasure, and I won't be stopped by anyone. I never feared Flint, alive or dead. There's 700,000 pounds right here. A gentleman of fortune wouldn't turn away from that for a dead sailor with a blue face." But the other pirates were more scared now. "Don't talk about spirits, John," said Mary. The others were too scared to speak. They would have run if they could, but fear kept them close to Silver, and his courage seemed to give them some hope. "Maybe it was a spirit," said Silver. "But there's one thing that's not clear to me. I heard an echo. No spirit has a shadow, So why would a spirit have an echo? This argument seemed weak to me, but to my surprise, Mary seemed to feel better. "You've got a good head on your shoulders, John," he said. "Let's go. I think we're on the wrong path. And come to think of it, it did sound like Flint's voice, but maybe not exactly. It was more like someone else's voice. It was like—" "Ben Gunn!" shouted Silver. "Yes, it was Ben Gunn!" cried Morgan, jumping up. "It doesn't matter," said Dick. "Ben Gunn's not here anymore, just like Flint." The other pirates laughed at Dick. "No one cares about Ben Gunn," said Mary. "He's nothing, dead or alive." The pirates' spirits seemed to lift, and their faces looked more relaxed. They started talking again, and after a while, they shouldered their tools and began walking. Mary walked at the front with Silver's compass to stay on the right path towards Skeleton Island. Silver was right. No one cared about Ben Gunn. Dick kept praying, holding his Bible, and looking around with scared eyes. Silver even joked about it. "I told you," said Silver. "You've ruined your Bible. If it's not good for swearing, what use is it for a spirit? Not much." And he snapped his fingers, stopping for a moment. But Dick didn't seem comforted. In fact, it was clear he was getting sick. His fever was rising quickly, probably from the heat, the hard walking, and the fear he had felt. The walking was easy here, as we were at the top of the hill. The pines grew far apart, and the ground was hot and dry. We were walking towards the northwest, getting closer to Spyglass Hill. On the other side, we could see the wide bay where I had once been afraid on the small boat. We reached the first tall tree, but it wasn't the right one. The second tree was also wrong. The third tree was huge, almost 200 feet tall, standing over a small group of bushes. It had a large shadow, and it could be seen from far away, both east and west, like a big marker on the map. But what made the pirates excited wasn't the tree itself. It was knowing that 700,000 pounds of gold were buried somewhere under that tree. As they got closer, all their fears seemed to disappear. Their eyes shone, their steps were faster, and all they cared about was the treasure. Silver hobbled along with his crutch, breathing hard. He cursed when the flies landed on his hot face. He pulled on the rope that tied me to him, looking at me with an angry glare. He wasn't hiding his thoughts. All he cared about now was the treasure, and I could tell he planned to take it for himself. He hoped to steal the treasure, kill anyone in his way, and sail away with the gold. I was scared, and it was hard to keep up with them. Sometimes I tripped, and Silver yanked the rope, staring at me angrily. Dick, who had fallen behind, was talking to himself, praying and cursing as his fever got worse. His sickness made me feel worse too, and I couldn't stop thinking about the terrible things that had happened on this very hill. I imagined Flint, with his blue face, killing his 6 men right here. This peaceful place had once been the scene of a terrible crime, and I almost thought I could still hear the cries. We reached the edge of the forest. "Hooray! All together!" shouted Mary, and the first pirates began running. Then, just 10 yards ahead, they stopped. A quiet cry was heard. Silver hurried forward, digging his crutch into the ground, and soon he and I stopped too. In front of us was a big hole in the ground. It wasn't very new, and the sides had fallen in, with grass growing at the bottom. In the hole, I saw the shaft of a broken pickaxe and some wooden boxes lying around. One of the boxes had the name Walrus burned into it, the name of Flint's ship. The treasure was gone. The chest had been opened, and the 700,000 pounds of gold were taken. Chapter 33. The Fall of a Chieftain. There had never been such a big change in anything before. Each of the 6 pirates looked as if they had been hit. But Silver, when it happened, was calm almost at once. He had been thinking about the money like a runner in a race, but now, in 1 second, it was all gone. He stayed calm, got his temper back, and changed his plan before the others even realized what had happened. "Jim," he whispered to me, "take this and get ready for trouble." He handed me a pistol. Then he started walking north quietly. After a few steps, he was far enough ahead to put some space between us and the other pirates. He looked back at me and nodded, as if saying, "This is a tricky situation." His look wasn't friendly, and I couldn't help but whisper, "So you've changed sides again." He didn't have time to answer. The pirates, angry and shouting, jumped into the hole and started digging with their hands, throwing the boards aside. Morgan found a piece of gold. He held it up and cursed. It was a 2-guinea coin, and it passed from hand to hand among the pirates for a few moments. "2 guineas!" shouted Mary, holding the coin at Silver. "This is your 700,000 pounds? You're the one who made this deal? You're the one who always messed things up." "Dig away, boys," said Silver calmly. "You'll find some pig nuts, I bet." "Pig nuts!" Mary screamed. "Do you hear that? This man knew it all along. Look at his face. You can see it there." "Ah, Mary," said Silver. "Back to being captain again? You sure are bold." But this time, all the pirates agreed with Mary. They started scrambling out of the hole, throwing angry looks at Silver. One thing I noticed, they all climbed out of the hole on the side away from Silver. Now there were 2 of us on one side and 5 on the other, with the hole between us. No one was brave enough to make the first move. Silver didn't move. He stood still, watching them with his crutch, looking calm as ever. He was brave, no doubt about it. Finally, Mary seemed to think talking would help. "Mates," he said, "there are only 2 of them over there. One is the old cripple who brought us here and ruined everything. The other is that boy who I plan to deal with. Now, mates—" He raised his arm and his voice, clearly ready to lead an attack. But just then, 3 musket shots rang out from the bushes. Mary fell into the hole. The man with the bandage spun around and fell, dead but still twitching. The other 3 ran away as fast as they could. Before anyone could blink, Silver had shot twice at the struggling Mary, and as the man looked up at him in pain, Silver said, "George, I think I've taken care of you." At the same time, the doctor, Gray, and Ben Gunn arrived, their muskets still smoking, coming out from the trees. "Let's go!" cried the doctor. "Quick, we need to stop them from reaching the boats." We all started running fast, cutting through bushes and trees. Silver worked hard to keep up with us. He pushed himself so much, jumping on his crutch as fast as he could, that it seemed impossible for him to keep going. But he did. The doctor said that no one who was healthy could have done what Silver did. By the time we reached the top of the slope, Silver was 30 yards behind us and almost out of breath. "Doctor!" he called. "Wait! No, hurry!" And he was right. We could see the 3 pirates still running toward Mizzenmast Hill, and we were already in between them and the boats. We sat down to rest, while Silver slowly caught up with us. "Thank you, Doctor," Silver said. "You came just in time for me and Hawkins. And Ben Gunn, too. You're a strange one, to be sure." "I'm Ben Gunn, yes," said the Maroon, squirming a bit from embarrassment. "And how do you do, Mr. Silver? I'm fine, thank you. Ben, Silver said quietly, to think you've done this to me. The doctor sent Gray back to pick up a tool that the pirates had left behind. As we walked down to the boats, the doctor quickly explained what had happened. The story was very interesting to Silver, and Ben Gunn was the hero of the whole thing. Ben had been wandering around the island alone when he found the skeleton. He had taken the treasure, dug it up, and carried it in many trips from the tall pine to a cave he had on the northern part of the island. The treasure had been hidden safely in the cave for 2 months before the Hispaniola arrived. When the doctor learned this, he had gone to Silver and given him the map, which was now useless, and all the supplies from Ben Gunn's cave, which had plenty of food. He did all this so he could move safely away from the stockade and guard the treasure. When I saw you, Jim, the doctor said, it broke my heart, but I did what I thought was best for those who had done their duty. And if you weren't one of them, whose fault was it? That morning, when the doctor saw the pirates had left, he ran to the cave with Gray and Ben Gunn to be ready by the pine tree. They had hoped to reach the pirates before they found the treasure. Ben Gunn, being fast, had been sent ahead to try and stop them, and it worked. The doctor and Gray arrived in time to set up an ambush before the treasure hunters came. Ah, said Silver, I'm glad I had Hawkins with me. If it were up to you, Doctor, you would have let old John be cut to pieces without a second thought. Not a second thought, the doctor said, smiling. By now, we had reached the boats. The doctor used a pickaxe to destroy one of them, and we all climbed into the other and set off toward North Inlet. It was about 8 or 9 miles. Even though Silver was almost dead from exhaustion, he took an oar, just like the rest of us. We moved quickly across the smooth sea. Soon we passed the 2-pointed hill, where we saw the mouth of Ben Gunn's cave and the squire standing by it with a musket. We waved to him, and Silver joined in, cheering just like anyone else. 3 miles later, we reached North Inlet and saw the Hispaniola drifting by. The last tide had lifted her, and if the wind or tide had been stronger, we might never have found her. Luckily, only the main sail was damaged. We dropped another anchor and headed back to Rum Cove, the closest place to Ben Gunn's cave. Gray then went back alone to the Hispaniola to stay on guard. A small hill led up to the cave entrance. At the top, we saw the squire. He was friendly to me, saying nothing about my adventure. When Silver saluted, the squire turned a little red. John Silver, he said, you're a terrible villain. I'm told not to prosecute you, so I won't. But the dead men are still with you, like a heavy burden. Thank you, sir, Silver replied, saluting again. I dare you to thank me, cried the squire. It's my duty. Stand back. Then we all went into the cave. It was big, with fresh air, and had a small spring and a pool of clear water surrounded by ferns. On the floor was sand. Captain Smollett was lying near the fire, and in the far corner I saw piles of gold coins and bars of gold. This was the treasure we had all been searching for. The treasure that had already cost the lives of 17 men from the Hispaniola. How many had died to gather it, we could never know. But 3 men still remained on the island. Silver, Morgan, and Ben Gunn, each of whom had taken part in the crimes that led to this treasure. Come in, Jim, said the captain. You're a good boy, but I don't think we'll sail together again. You're too much of a favorite for me. Is that you, John Silver? What brings you here? I've come back to do my duty, sir, Silver replied. "Ah," said the captain, and that was all. That night, I had a wonderful supper with my friends. We ate Ben Gunn's salted goat and some treats, with a bottle of old wine from the Hispaniola. Everyone was happy. And Silver, sitting a little out of the firelight, ate a lot, ready to jump up whenever something was needed, and even laughed quietly with us. He was still the same polite, friendly man from our voyage. Chapter 34. And last. The next morning, we started working early, moving all the gold, almost a mile by land to the beach, and then 3 miles by boat to the Hispaniola, was a big job for so few people. The 3 pirates who were still on the island didn't bother us much. We kept a guard on the hill to watch for any surprise attacks, but we thought they had fought enough for now. So we worked quickly. Gray and Ben Gunn went back and forth with the boat while the rest of us carried the treasure to the beach. 2 bars of gold, tied together with a rope, made a good load for a man to carry. I wasn't much help with carrying, so I spent the day in the cave, packing the coins into bags. The coins were from many countries: England, France, Spain, Portugal. There were doubloons, double guineas, moidores, and sequins. There were coins with the pictures of kings from Europe, strange coins from the East, with pictures that looked like string or spider webs, round coins, square coins, and coins with holes in the middle to wear around your neck. It was like sorting through all the different kinds of money in the world. My back hurt from bending over, and my fingers were sore from sorting them all. Day after day, we worked. By evening, we had stored some of the treasure on the ship, but there was always more to do. The 3 pirates didn't disturb us, and we didn't hear from them for a while. On the 3rd night, the doctor and I were walking on the hill when we heard a strange noise from below. It sounded like shouting and singing mixed together, coming from the darkness. "Heaven forgive them," said the doctor. "It's the mutineers." "All drunk, sir," came Silver's voice from behind us. Silver was allowed to move freely, and even though he had been treated badly, he still acted like he was an important part of the group. He was polite and tried to make friends with everyone, even though I didn't trust him. Still, I had to admit that I had some reason to be thankful to him, even if I knew he had been thinking about betraying us again. "That's right," said the doctor to Silver. "They're drunk or mad." "Right, sir," Silver said, "and it doesn't matter to us." "I don't think you're a kind man," said the doctor, "but if I were sure they were mad, and I think one of them has a fever, I would go and help them." "You would be wrong," said Silver. "You'd lose your life. I'm on your side now, and I don't want to see you or our group hurt. But those men down there, they couldn't keep their word, not if they wanted to." "I see," said the doctor. "You're the man who keeps his word." That was the last we heard from the 3 pirates. Once we heard a gunshot far away, but we thought they were just hunting. We decided to leave them on the island. Ben Gunn and Gray were happy with this decision. We left them some food, tools, and other supplies, including some tobacco, as the doctor asked. That was the last time we did anything on the island. We had already stored the treasure, and we made sure to have enough water and goat meat for the trip. Finally, one bright morning, we left the island and sailed out of North Inlet with the same flag that the captain had used when he fought at the stockade. The pirates must have been watching us more closely than we thought. As we sailed near the southern point, we saw them kneeling on a piece of sand with their arms raised, asking for mercy. It was hard to leave them like that, but we couldn't risk another fight. We shouted to them and told them where we had left supplies, They kept calling us and begging us not to leave them. As we sailed away, one of them, I'm not sure which one, stood up and fired a shot at us, just missing Silver. We stayed behind the ship's walls, and when I looked again, the pirates were gone, and we couldn't see them anymore. That was the last we saw of them. By noon, I was so happy to see that the island was far behind us, disappearing into the blue sea. We were short on men, so everyone on the ship had to help. The captain was still weak and gave orders from his bed, but he was getting better. We sailed for the nearest port in Spanish America because we needed fresh hands before we could go home. It took a long time because of the wind and storms, and we were all exhausted. At sunset, we anchored in a beautiful bay, surrounded by boats full of people selling fruits, vegetables, and offering to dive for money. It felt like a complete change from our dark and dangerous time on the island. The doctor, the squire, and I went ashore to relax, and we met the captain of an English warship. We talked to him and had a good time, and by morning we were back on the Hispaniola. Ben Gunn was on deck alone. When we got aboard, he made a confession. Silver had escaped hours before in a small boat, and Ben Gunn said he had helped him to save our lives. If Silver had stayed, we would have been in danger. But Silver didn't leave empty-handed. He had cut through a wall and taken a sack of coins, worth a lot of money, to help him escape. We were glad to be rid of him. After that, we finished our trip home. When the Hispaniola reached Bristol, the company was getting ready to send out another ship. Only 5 men from the crew returned. The rest had died, mostly because of drinking and fighting, but we were not as bad off as the ship in the song. With 1 man of her crew alive, what put to sea with 75? We all got a fair share of the treasure, and we spent it in different ways. Captain Smollett retired from the sea. Gray saved his money and studied to become a ship officer. He is now married with a family and owns part of a fine ship. Ben Gunn got £1,000, but he spent it all in just a few weeks. He came back begging, and we gave him a job as a watchman. He's now a popular man, even if the local boys make fun of him, and he's a good singer in church. We haven't heard anything more about Silver. He must have met up with his old friend, the old woman, and is probably living comfortably with her and Captain Flint. I hope so, because his chances of happiness in the next life are very small. The silver and the weapons that Flint buried are still there, I think. They will stay there for me. I would never go back to that island. The worst dreams I have are when I hear the sound of the waves on the shore, or wake up with the voice of Captain Flint still in my head. Pieces of 8, pieces of 8.